Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Safina.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
I'll introduce you shortly. If you can turn your mic off for the time being. Thank you. Good morning from Doha, everyone, and Assalamu alaikum. A warm welcome for those who are returning from yesterday and our new joiners. Welcome to day 2 of Education Disrupted, Education Reimagined. My name is Amina Hussein. I'm from Qatar. I'm the Director of Programs and Curator at WISE. Before WISE, I was a school teacher, then joined Qatar Foundation, where I supported the development of higher education arm, working in recent years in developing well-rounded learning experiences for undergrad and grad students in Education City. It is my honor to be your MC for the day, in the morning and the evening sessions. Let me start with some house items first. As you may see, you have a chat feature on your right side. Please use it to post comments and ask questions and answer polling questions. You can mark your comment with the question icon if you mean to post a question. This will be handy when we open the floor for questions from the audience. For those who would like to post on social media, please use hashtag Education Reimagined as you tweet or post about today. Our tweet handle is @wise_T for tweets. As I onboard you on the topics that we will discuss today, please answer the polls that will be posted on the chat feature. Our first question for the day, where are you joining us from? Another question that we will be posting as well, what is your role in the education system? Before we talk about today's program, I would like to mention some highlights from yesterday. As you know, our event that started yesterday is part 2 of a series that started in April. Our CEO yesterday, Stavros M Safina, said, "What powers civilizations is education." So we have still much work to do. Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director for Education at UNESCO, highlighted the roles of schools and teachers in society, saying, "We realize more than ever that schools are not where our children learn. Schools are the core of societies." Former UK Prime Minister, Mr. Gordon Brown, said, "The crisis is so unprecedented and so severe that our promises about the basic right to education are being tested, making the delivery by the 2030 deadline of Sustainable Goal 4, ensuring every child has quality primary and secondary education, seem like a distant dream." With this perhaps alarming statement from Mr. Gordon Brown, I would like to transition into a more hopeful call to action as we discuss the themes of day 2. In day 2, we will look at how we can best future-proof educational ecosystems and leverage existing innovation to bolster resilience. What is driving social innovation? What can the education sector learn from other sectors, such as the creative industry, as they build content and partnerships based on human connection and storytelling? Are we using recent disruptions as an opportunity for radical change? My colleague, Dr. Esma, yesterday mentioned Plato's famous quote, "Necessity is the mother of invention." How can we use the disruption of the recent crisis as an opportunity to reimagine education and the way we apply resources? As I'm talking to you right now, I know that the team will be posting another poll question where you can talk about the biggest barriers to quality education for all. With that, I want to transition to our next segment. One voice that is often missing when we discuss education is the voice of students. Today and tomorrow, we will be showcasing some videos with students from Education City and fellows from Wise Learners Voice program, who will share their experiences, challenges as well during the pandemic, and what they hope to see in the future.
Yeah, my name is Sara Shaath. I went to Northwestern University in Qatar and I studied journalism and strategic communication. One of my main roles in my senior year was that I was president of NUQSU, which is the NUQ student government. One of the main lessons that I learned by being the president was honestly just to learn to put others before me. I think, having to deal with the first student-led protest, with the world pandemic, it really made me understand the importance of, people sometimes don't just want to be led, they want to be heard. And I think that's one of the most important lessons that I learned by being the president at Northwestern. I think that there should be more room for innovation. I think it's really important to recognize that different students have different ways in which they learn and different ways in which they grasp information, and learning to understand that sometimes the couple of students that might not necessarily like the way something is taught, it doesn't mean that it's incorrect. In fact, it might mean that those are the types of individuals that will innovate because they believe in their own dreams and they believe in their own passions. And I think schools should attempt to manifest that and attempt to understand that innovation and creativity is very important, whether it's in a classroom, in a lecture room. And understanding the importance of innovation will actually help us create and innovate more in this world, and just create more room for successes, and honestly just making the world a much easier place to live in, because we're more accepting of different people, their ideas and their passions. I think schools should empower students to become more active in sharing the future of education by helping students understand the importance of education. I think more often than not, with the rise of social media, people are often fed this information that university is not needed, and that knowledge can be obtained from something like YouTube videos or just other content. And I think that delegitimizes the importance of attending university, attending master's programs, having a PhD. And I think understanding and having people understand that actual knowledge is obtained from these places will allow us to actually help students to become more motivated to attend, colleges, universities, master's programs, PhD programs, all of these, and help students understand that actually these systems will change to allow you to adapt to the world that we live in. I think more often than not, we are given this knowledge, but we don't know how to use that knowledge. And I think universities should start to implement the importance of this knowledge and how it helps us in the world that we live in today.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing some of your experiences with us. It's always great to hear from students. So I see, looking at the poll that we posted earlier in the day around where people are coming and joining us from, I see that we have a lot of people as well joining us from Asia today. So welcome again to all of our joiners from all the parts of this globe. We move to our next segment where we will have our keynote. Our keynote speaker is a passionate advocate for gender equality. She is the founder and executive director of Educate Girls, a non-for-profit that strives for girls' education in India's remotest and hardest to reach villages, impacting more than 380,000 out-of-school girls up to date. She's the brain behind using the Development Impact Bond in education and globally recognized for her remarkable work. Towards the end of her keynote, Ms. Safina Hussain will be joined by our CEO, Mr. Stavros who will moderate a Q&A session. And here, I would like to remind the audience to post their questions on the chat feature on the right-hand side and mark them with the question icon. Ms. Safina Hussain, if you are ready, it's my honor to welcome you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me. It is my honor to deliver today's keynote on how educational disruption due to the pandemic can be turned into an opportunity to rethink education systems worldwide. I have spent the last 12 years working with communities, remote villages for girls' education. And I want to propose today that as we try to rebuild in a way that allows for greater equity, access, inclusion, and innovation, it's important to keep the most vulnerable girls at the center of any new design. Only then can we bring real transformation in the way education systems address the needs of the generations to come. I started Educate Girls in 2007 with the realization that everything that I have achieved is very much because of my education. And since then, we have mobilized communities to question prevailing gender biases against girls and worked in government schools to deliver a child-centric remedial curriculum that helps in improving learning outcomes for all children. In the last 12 years, what I have recognized is that the two Ps, poverty and patriarchy, are the key barriers to girls' education. And now with COVID-19, both of these challenges have become much, much worse. First, the poverty. The economic shock due to job losses and reverse migration has plunged families back into poverty. A recent UN report suggests that nearly 35 million people who had risen out of poverty will be below the extreme line this year alone. And before the end of 2030, 130 million might be living in extreme poverty. So the achievement of the SDGs is under grave threat. Alongside the economic factors, we come to patriarchy. There are crippling communities. There is an emerging regression to all old gendered roles in the households. As families are cooped up, anxieties are high, and children are not in school. We're seeing domestic duties falling straight back onto the shoulders of young girls. We're seeing 17 times increase in domestic abuse cases. India's emergency child helpline received 92,000 SOS calls in just the first 11 days of the lockdown. And distress calls to the National Commission for Women's Helpline doubled. With patriarchy back at play and girls' vulnerabilities shooting back up, school will become a distant memory for so many, and re-enrollment will become near impossible. I wanted to take the example of West Africa after Ebola, where girls' enrollment failed to reach pre-Ebola levels. UNESCO reported that in Liberia, the number of out-of-school girls at primary level tripled from 8% to 21%. Similar to West Africa, where teen pregnancies and child marriage increased, we are seeing more girls being forced to get married. I wanted to share with you a short story that illustrates my point. This is Geeta Story, who was a young girl from a small village in India. When the pandemic hit, Geeta was on the verge of completing her secondary education. With schools closed, distance learning seems kind of impossible for girls like Geeta because they aren't allowed to access the mobile phones because it's thought to be inappropriate. When Geeta took her father's phone to text a girlfriend, her father and brother thought that she was dishonoring her family by talking to a boy. Her brother slapped her, and in anger and despair, she consumed poison and was rushed to a hospital. Geeta was lucky to survive, but she was packed off to live with her husband and in-laws. And as soon as this happened, 3 other girls from the same village met the same fate. Before COVID-19 hit, we were acutely aware of the global learning crisis. And despite huge strides, we had around 130 million girls out of school. With so many countries still in lockdown, we can only estimate the impact that COVID crisis will have. As Geeta's story illustrates, one thing we know for sure is that the crisis has widened inequalities and hit hardest those already struggling, ignored, excluded, or lagging behind. So as we reflect on this and consider the opportunities to build back better, I'm proposing that to tackle the 2 Ps of poverty and patriarchy, we focus on the 3 Rs, which is relief, recovery, and reimagining education systems, all through a gender lens. First, looking at relief. As an education-focused NGO, our priority is always the education of our children. But in these unprecedented times, if we as civil society don't have an immediate response to help alleviate hunger and the risk of deepening poverty, our children will suffer and bear the weight of this crisis. For this reason, at Educate Girls, we pivoted to support the government with food distribution, awareness building, and signposting to social security schemes in some of the poorest and most marginalized villages. And it isn't a surprise that these villages, which are the poorest and most socially excluded, these are the villages with the highest concentration of out-of-school girls. The pandemic has hit the education systems on many levels, and the road to recovery will be long. And we have to accept that all the gains that we have made in enrollment, retention, learning may potentially be undone. So I feel that as the schools prepare to reopen, we have to prioritize enrollment, retention, learning, and address the challenges of nutrition, safety, emotional well-being, and then tackle the inevitable impact on learning. The top on my priority is hunger. And the reason it is hunger is that even in normal times, our women and girls are the last to eat at home, and they eat what is left over. With poverty worsening, they are at highest risk of extreme hunger. To address this, schools need to double down and extend the midday meal programs or take-home rations, possibly extending them to include breakfast wherever budget is. Extra food resources for rural areas where the migrant children are coming back. They've returned to these villages. And tracking and monitoring of this scheme will be incredibly critical. We at Educate Girls have very quickly pivoted, and we have leveraged our existing community and government relationships, the data that we have, and the last mile reach to distribute food to over 100,000 households in just the last 2 months. The second on my list after hunger is safety and access. We need mass awareness on the need for children, particularly young girls, to come back to school when schools reopen. And we have to activate community mobilization to make this sustainable. We have to leverage our communities to really create a demand for girls' education. At Educate Girls, we have created an army of over 14,000 gender champions at the village level to do just that. And in today's time, during the lockdown, we're reaching out to them via WhatsApp, with SMS, phone calls. So we're sort of pivoting to saying, if we can't go face to face, what are the ways in which we can innovate very quickly to activate and keep our gender champions checking on our girls and continuing to mobilize and create a demand for girls' education. Yes, universal access was close to being achieved, but I'm afraid we have to realize that access will become a huge problem again. And for this access to be looked at, we will need an expanded role of our school administrations, our school management committees, engaging more in attendance, and increased capacities. We need more room for girls in residential schools and tribal hostels. Maybe even cash transfers to attract and retain girls in school. So we have to think very, very innovatively at whatever we can bring to the table to be able to solve during this crisis. Because girls like Geeta need to be back in school and they need to complete their education. The third piece, emotional well-being. I mean, this is a theme that came out very strongly in the April meeting, and it's a point that I feel I want to reiterate. Children are feeling significant emotional stress and anxiety with the lockdown. Just think of Geeta's situation. Now we need to see psychosocial support initiatives as an absolute priority when schools open. We need to reduce the stress and pressure on children. We can't pressure them to complete the course for the year. We need to help them re-engage with the full school experience and help them overcome the trauma of the pandemic. And finally, to learning. We will have to find a balance between online and offline learning modules or blended learning. Substantial resources will have to go into remedial curriculums, increased investments in bridge camps to support those who have fallen furthest behind or are at risk of dropping out. And now finally, let's talk about reimagining the education system. We need to reimagine an education system that works for all. We know that when we design for those struggling the most, we are fair to everyone and everyone benefits. All means all is how the new GEM report launched just yesterday describes it. When we ran the first ever pilot for a new way of funding education through an impact bond a couple of years ago, we designed a new teaching and learning approach that prioritized children who were lagging furthest behind. We broke down lessons into micro competencies and saw an almost whole additional year of learning achieved in just a few months. We achieved staggering learning aids for so many children as a result of designing for the children starting from the lowest base. Anything we do now to reimagine education has to start from this position. We have to tackle patriarchy and reimagine an education system where textbooks and teaching materials are without gender bias and without the damaging traditional stereotypes. Technology will play a critical role, but school closures are shining a very bright light on the debilitating urban-rural and gender digital divide, which is preventing any form of distance learning from reaching so many of the rural and poor children, and especially girls who need it most. As we see in Geeta's story, even with the phone and internet connectivity in her household, patriarchy still prevented mobile access to so many girls. In conclusion, if there is one corner I'm going to fight, it is, not surprisingly, the corner for girls. And I thank Gordon Brown and Lisbeth Steer, among many others, for their leadership in ensuring that girls are prioritized in Build Back Better strategy. As we reimagine education, we need an intentional gender lens, because gender neutral is actually aligned. The World Economic Forum suggested in a recent report that it's going to take 99.5 years for the gender gap to be closed. And we definitely cannot wait that long. I am Sofia Hassan, and I educate girls. Thank you.
Safina, thank you. Welcome back to WISE. And thank you for that very sobering, I would say, assessment of what the pandemic is doing to the cause of girls' education. I think it's, if people have not woken up to the risk of regression, they really ought to listen very carefully to you. Let me just start by, you mentioned poverty and the patriarchy as the key barriers, and these have traditionally been the key barriers. Mm-hmm. As we look towards recovery, how do we prioritize between these two, or is that even a choice?
So unfortunately, it isn't. I don't think it is a choice that we need to make. What we see, and we have, we've knocked on over 5 million doors in the last few years. So we have incredible data, household level data from over 5 million households. And we use advanced analytics and machine learning to actually predict areas which have the highest number of out-of-school girls. Yeah. And again, we see there'll be areas that are poor, And then there are areas which are socially marginalized, which is, the proxy for patriarchy. But where these two kind of intersect, you have an explosion of out-of-school girls. So I think instead of saying, is this either or an or, we have to look at where we have to almost precision target those areas where these two are meeting. And start, and we will actually have the highest gains. To give you an example, I work in a district which has about 1,000 villages and about 40,000 out-of-school girls. Out of the 1,000 villages, 80% of the out-of-school girls are in 30% of the villages. And that's the lens that we have to take. We have to kind of see where is this intersecting, where's the highest concentration, and that's where we go and solve for both poverty and patriarchy.
Thank you. And I have a sort of question from the floor here that I think might be worth reflecting on. It comes from Neha Rahil. And she's suggesting that a lot of parents are, pushed into denying education for their girls because of economic pressures, which we're aware of. And her suggestion is, why not prepare them to be entrepreneurs rather than sort of pushing them into early marriage? Is that part of the solution, that what we teach girls may also not be what's most appropriate or useful in that particular context?
So I think Neha, what the question she's asking is very relevant. I think what we teach girls and how we make it relevant for them is really critical. However, what we see is that, when you're teaching entrepreneurship skills, etc., you're going to actually start at least at middle school or secondary school.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have been in classrooms, and I have two daughters. I took them once to a very tribal village, and we were standing in grade 1, and this was a few years ago. And the headmaster said, all those girls who are married, put your hands up. And about half a dozen girls put their hands up.
Wow.
So essentially, it's not just that by the time they're getting to 14, 15, 16, sometimes what you're seeing is that they're engaged to be married much, much, much earlier. And then as soon as they get their period, they're gone. So the entrepreneurship and the second, those are all slightly more downstream pieces. But I think just changing the mindset, making sure that we find these girls young, bring them into school, and really push to keep them in school is absolutely key. And we see between the 5th and 6th grade transition, you lose a large number of girls. Between the 8th and 9th grade transition, you lose it. So I think those are the points where we have to be really focusing.
Got another question here coming from Preeta Chowdhury, which I think is interesting to reflect on. And you mentioned your 14,000 gender champions at the village level. And she's asking, what are some of the concrete steps that Educate Girls is taking to deal with parents? I think if I can just adjust that question a little bit, is what are you hearing from your 14,000 gender champions? What are they doing? How are you supporting them? And what is the impact of their interventions been so far?
Yeah. So we're actually seeing this incredible level of, innovation at the ground level. I mean, these are gender champions. We call them Team Balika, which is basically a team for the girl child. These are young people, 18 to 24, who are some of the most educated people in their own village, who understand the importance of education. And what we've seen with the Team Balika volunteers is very quickly they have pivoted to using WhatsApp, to Zoom. We did child protection training for about 1,600 people, and all on an app. And we were able to, and very, very quickly, even a young person, 12th pass, living in a tribal village, has been able to attend and participate in trainings and then make contact with their parents, either through phone or, we've had Team Balika volunteers who are calling girls and making sure that they're okay, who are intervening if parents are trying to get the girls married, or, girls who were in school, sending them to their in-laws' house. So I think we're seeing a huge, and what they're also doing is they are helping their communities to fight COVID, whether it's masks, whether it's food distribution. I mean, we have 100,000 households is a large number of households to deliver. I mean, sometimes we have to take boats and cross over into, going behind the mountainside because there were 20 other households there. And it's only because of our gender champions, our volunteers, because they understand the hunger, they understand what our women and girls are going through.
Safina, just one last question, and that, I think if your keynote has highlighted anything, it really is that education sits at the intersect of public health, social justice, and economic development. And you emphasize that we ought to prioritize well-being as we look to rebuild. Can you say a little bit more about that? And in your mind, is this just a question of recovering from the crisis, or should we really be looking for a more permanent shift in the focus of education?
It's a really good question. And I would urge, and I think the future is convergence. I think this is just not a Ministry of Education piece, but I think the ministries of education have to collaborate actively to ensure that, all of these pieces are being looked at, from health, from, child protection, because our bridge courses, I mean, we have, camps, residential bridge camps. They're not just about providing a remedial education, but they're also prevention. And they're all about child protection. If a girl, instead of a school, I can have her in a bridge course for 3 weeks or 3 months or 9 months, I'm still protecting her from child marriage. So I think that level, and also hunger. I mean, schools help us tackle hunger on a big level. So I think convergence is really the future. And we have to bring ministries together and also link. That's what we're doing. We're saying, you want to come back and do education, but we understand that you're poor. How can we link you to social protection schemes? Yeah. And I don't think it can happen in isolation. It has to be cross-sectoral.
Safina Hussain, thank you for being with us. Thank you for educating girls. And we wish you all the very best from WISE. We're here to support you and help you make the case that this is critically important for the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Amina, back to you.
Thank you, Stavros. Thank you, Stavros and Safina, for this amazing discussion on the importance of bridging the gap of gender inequality. Safina, I hope hearing such stories make us all realize that, those are not stories we hear. Those are lives, real lives that need to be saved and lived with full access to all human rights. Our next panel will examine how learning ecosystems can create new avenues for multi-level stakeholder participation in both the online and physical space. It is my pleasure to introduce a list at the UNESCO Office for the Gulf States and Yemen. Danilo oversees the planning, implementation, and monitoring of academic needs of this region and has extensive expertise in adult literacy and curriculum reform. Danilo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amina, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. As Amina said, my name is Dani Bedelia, and I am education specialist at the UNESCO office in Doha. I'm pleased to welcome you all to day 2 of WISE virtual convening under the theme Leveraging Innovation to Reimagine Resilience. Joining me in today's session, titled Future Proofing Learning Ecosystems, are 3 distinguished panelists. They are Rosie Clayton, co-founder of the Weaving Lab, which is working with a wide range of partners and clients around the world. Weaving Lab develops participatory place-based learning models and new ecosystems in education, which advance personalized learning and equity. Prior to this, Rosie was an associate director at the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce, where she led the design and launch of the Cities of Learning program in the UK. She is also currently involved in the OECD Education 2030 project and one of Ashoka's global change leaders. Next, we have Akshay Chaturvedi. Akshay is the CEO and founder and the driving force behind the one of India's fastest growing startups, Leverage Edu. Leverage Edu empowers students across India to choose the best matched career and higher education options with one-touch access to personalized mentors and leading global universities. The company initially began as a higher education mentorship marketplace in Silicon Valley's Draper University's 2015 cohort and was formally launched in early 2017. Leverage Edu's technology-powered higher education and career guidance ecosystem use artificial intelligence to help students work with best-matched mentors from around the world in personalized career workshops. And finally, Fatma Al-Remaihi. Fatma was appointed CEO of the Doha Film Institute in 2014. She is responsible for overseeing the strategic direction of the institute, maintaining its focus on promoting film culture in Qatar, and establishing its presence on the regional and international stage. She also serves as director of the Institute's annual film events, Kumra and the Asial Film Festival, guiding the artistic, strategic, and operational aspects of both events designed to nurture the next generation of creative professionals, as well as strengthen Qatar's position within the international film community. Welcome, panelists. Before I give you the floor, let me just provide a bit of a background and context on today's session, the key topics to be discussed and insights to gain from your experiences and expertise. As the title suggests, future-proofing learning ecosystems will look at how, over the last few months, communities around the world have begun to transform their ecosystems and the way actors interact so that they are better prepared for the future. The session will also examine how learning ecosystems can create new pathways for multi-level stakeholder participation in both the online and material space, while avoiding the creation of silos of information and resources. The session will aim to provide insights from our panelists, allow for cross-sectional conversation that will include perspective from the private sector, civil society, and the academia. It will allow for discussion on how to foster innovation for more equity, strategies for using local ecosystems to maximum advantage, and finding ways to rethink education technology. And all this with a view to enhancing resilience of educational ecosystems. Just one important reminder for our participants. Please participate in the poll, which will be shown in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. You may also, and actually are encouraged to, post questions using the same chat box, and we will try to address as many of them as possible towards the end of our session. Let me now ask our panelists. The first question will go to Rosie. Rosie, learning ecosystems and localized multi-sectoral coalitions often rely on a place-based approach. How can we ensure collaborations, communication, and impact of coalitions persist when the place shifts to a digital frontier? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danilo, and yeah, thank you very much for having me today. It's great to be with you all. It's a fascinating question, isn't it, the role of that sort of digital and place-based interactions. And I think we're seeing a very interesting sort of role for digital communities, particularly now as the majority of kind of learning and interactions has moved online around the world. And, thinking very much about the role of technology and being able to kind of foster community connections and collaborations. But some of the things that I've learned from my work in developing place-based initiatives around the world, is really thinking about the role of kind of an anchor or a steward organization in kind of organizing conversations. So these, and again, can quite easily be done through a sort of digital mode, where tech becomes the connective tissue that brings everybody together. So I think, really paying attention to how those localized relationships that might, exist within particular places, whether that's cities, villages, towns, countries, and regions, can be nurtured and progressed through digital means. This is a good example of that potentially. But I think, paying attention to different modes of really kind of enhancing those relationships through online interactions is important, and including obviously with learners, as learning has moved online too.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Rosie. I think we'll have a follow-up question, but I think let me first go to Akshay. Akshay, this question is for you. So how can academic institutions become more open to technology and consider it not just as a tool, but a central component of their design? Thank you.
Daniel, could you just repeat the question once? I had some lag at my end.
How can academic institutions become more open to technology and consider technology not just as a tool, but as a central component of their design?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There's some lag, Danilo. Let me just give me a minute. Some lag. Let me just fix it.
Danilo, would you mind maybe moving to another speaker until Akshay,
Yes,
work
I will do that.
connection?
So yes, okay. I'll go to Fatma. Just a moment. Sorry. Thanks. We'll fix the technical problem of Akshay. So Fatma,
I can hear you now.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, I was saying I missed your question. Could you just repeat it once? Missing your voice.
Let me ask once again. So how can academic institutions become more open to technology and consider technology not just as a tool, but a central component of their design? I'll go to Fatma because we have lost Akshay again. So Fatma, can you tell us how has the current crisis turned into opportunity for creative industry to reinvent itself and its impact in the context of learning and collaboration? The floor is yours.
Good morning, Dani, and good morning to all the panelists and the audience. I'm very honored to be with you all here. From a global industry perspective, I believe we have gained a new focus towards the search of meaning and responsibility when it comes to igniting initiatives, creating impacts, and offering creative outlets as we aim to keep our connections alive and let people all around the world draw inspiration and strength from this truly unique situation. The lessons of this will undoubtedly imprint within our society and in the way we create films in the future. Learning never stops, and particularly in times of new challenges. At this defining moment in our history, we see emergence of a global spirit of collaboration, solidarity, geared towards finding solutions. To answer your question, Dani, on the topic of reinvention, our industry has quickly adopted the new ways of working, including the exploration of new formats to manage online conversation, the creation of both intimate and community-wide digital experiences, and the shift to online events formats, just like the one we're participating in today. The universal lessons and experiences have reinforced our own awareness in the region that digital platforms are integral to our future, which is intimately linked to the education of youth and talent. As an Arab cultural organization, Doha Film Institute shares this common goal to continue to create opportunities and chances through learning and collaboration for those that needs it the most. Our support to creative talents and talented young filmmakers extend to a larger promise of keeping important connections alive and telling stories that have a lasting and positive impact. At DFI, we took decisive steps to confront the current situation and adapt in a way that keeps our film ecosystem alive, and to remind everybody that we are all in this together, particularly when we continue to draw on the creative arts to propel us forward. For example, our Qumra edition in 2020 was completely adapted online with more than 220 mentoring sessions and 200 match-made meetings, where we drew devoted participation from 34 international mentors and 100 industry experts hailing from nearly 40 countries, all dedicated to mentoring our 46 Qumra projects that included also 12 by Qatari filmmakers. The event witnessed participants from Algeria, Dominican Republic, Greece, Libya, Yemen, Morocco, Jordan, Italy, India, and many more. We've also transformed our year-round initiatives also to the digital hemisphere, like our youth workshops, our educational programs to develop technical skills, online film reviewing, live discussion platforms, industry roundtables for our filmmakers. We've also participated and partnered with the Ministry of Education and Higher Education in Qatar and Qatar Television on School Stars Film Competition on distance learning for all students in Qatar, where 18 students have won various awards for their short films in Arabic and foreign language categories. And we're very excited to roll out the next competition cycle to continue to fuel our youth through this successful creative outlet. We have learned a lot in a very short amount of time and accelerated our learning curve to open new horizons for digital formats that have the potential to expand also our reach permanently. It also reinforced our belief that the universal mediums of films, art, and music transcend limitations of other mass communication and unite people from distinct communities and disparate geographies in a common space of visual learning and understanding. Of course, when you tread a new path, many questions remain unanswered and open for debate. Nobody has the perfect formula and model, and organizers around the world are redesigning the very concept of film events and festivals as we speak and as we move towards digitally designed experiences. Personally, I would love to hear also the audience perspectives and ideas on how to keep the spirit of some of Qatar's flagship cultural events, such as the FI's annual Ajial Film Festival, alive and preserve its impact for the participating youth. I believe we're all stronger when we collaborate, when we exchange knowledge, and when we discuss ideas freely. In an era where we must lay down the very concept of physical and cultural barriers. We all are parts of this uncharted experiment in storytelling. If nothing else, it has definitely opened our minds to be more forgiving, where we all must come together for the sake of our future.
Thank you so much, Fatma. It's really interesting insight there. Also, I mean, as Rosie said, the involvement of the localized relationships, and I think really what's standing out is how quickly we're able to kind of move into online learning, and also the emergence of collaboration and solidarity. In the interest of time, because I think we missed Akshay, so the floor is yours, Akshay.
Sure. No, thank you so much, Ranillo. Thank you so much for having us, and really a privilege to be on this panel with such esteemed guests. So very quickly, I think it's a very interesting time to be in education right now. We are in the student mobility space. We see students move from one country to another in the hope of achieving their dreams, in the hope of achieving their education, in the hope of building careers. And we are seeing some really crazy times at the moment. We are seeing people who are very infatuated by the idea of being in the US, now thinking about doing STEM degrees in Canada. We saw last week the post-study work visa got kicked in the UK. So kind of really kind of have the same sentiment that Fatma just spoke about there's this big need of having solidarity in the international space at the moment. to go on and create a system which will ensure that we are all kind of growing together, interdependent on each other. Second piece of my very quick answer, very quick take on this is, I think what we're doing at the moment in terms of integrating technology with our current education system is we are only using the existing tools and kind of just putting it together. I think that's not the right way. If you see, we've already seen, like in India, we have had 3 months of lockdown now. Teachers are already exhausted. Students are already exhausted. This is when the summer vacation should have been on. It was fun in the beginning, but now they seem to have all given up. So online education, when we talk about it, when we talk about future-proofing ecosystems of the future, when we talk about learning in the 21st century and learning in say 2022, 2025, I think it really can't be classes over Zoom. It really can't be just a bunch of webinar tools put together and learning happening on that. It will have to be thought around from a ground up structure. Somebody will have to kind of go out and speak to millions of students and figure out what really works. Same thing for the teachers, same thing for the other ecosystem stakeholders. And I think that will take a while. Just like we can't, very unfortunately, release the COVID vaccine with the scientists just kind of coming up with it, and because it needs to be tested on animals and then on human beings, and then multiple clinical trials need to be done. And then you essentially launch a healthcare prescription which will save the world. How can we really believe that education is any different? How can we kind of release education in like 24 hours flat and say that healthcare will take 18 months? So I think that will again have to be, and I think that's a personal problem that I face with education systems across the world right now. I don't think we're really thinking about changing things, about kind of really, in the name of change, we are just kind of combining existing technology, existing software together with what we had. So I think as soon as we firstly acknowledge, and then start working on those pieces, that is when we will kind of start this journey towards moving towards having technology very well integrated. Until that happens, I think we're just doing things for the sake of it. So yeah, long way ahead in my opinion.
Thank you, Akshay. And you just mentioned that. I mean, I think we also need to of course talk about the inclusion, especially in education. And as you know, UNESCO has just published the 2020 Global Education Monitoring Report, and I think a lot of our colleagues should be able to. We're getting a lot of questions actually from participants, but again, in the interest of time, so I'll go back to you, Rosie. So I think the question is to you: how can we successfully identify and leverage informal education resources so that they meet the needs of education ministries, the government, and as well as the community networks?
Great question, thank you. Yeah, so first of all, I mean, when you think about education, and particularly informal education, and the sheer volume of informal education activities that exist, within our communities, within our places, and for me, a big part of the sort of starting point with this is really, building a more expansive vision about what learning happens where and what kinds of learning counts. So one of the things I've been really fascinated by during sort of the COVID-19 period is the amount of learning that's been taking place outdoors, for example, in nature. We've been learning a lot in our natural environment, and often that doesn't have the same sort of value or parity of esteem with kind of formal learning that happens as well. So for me, firstly, there's a piece about, expanding our vision and our ambition for what learning or informal learning counts and what matters. There's then a second piece about thinking about how do we connect informal learning with the learning that goes on within the formal sector or the kind of training sector. So connecting in school and out of school activities in different ways. Thinking about how we can almost sort of weave new pathways through formal and informal learning experiences to improve inclusion, kind of improve equity, to meet learners where they're at, often in terms of their interests and passions, and bring them into kind of, an educational ecosystem and potentially into more formal routes in that sense. But, the number of kind of the sheer volume of assets that exist within our informal education spaces is huge. I've also been thinking a lot about sort of learning in the home. Every home has become a classroom in recent times. I mean, who would have thought, parents are the primary educators? And how do we think about the sort of value that's been generated through those sort of forms of education? But I do think, we need to think about, where, learners' knowledge, skills, attitudes, capabilities, are cultivated in a holistic sense. and kind of improve the value of that in a connected way. And I've used and experimented with micro credentials in the past in previous work, digital open badges, which are really interesting ways of kind of giving a value and a currency to informal learning. So, I would suggest that would be an interesting way of thinking about this, not necessarily creating a sort of new qualification system, but certainly creating a new kind of certification architecture that tries to build on that parity and provide that connectivity as a way of leveraging the informal education space.
Thank you, Rosie. I mean, as a matter of fact, I mean, informal learning was not really given enough attention, I think, in the past. So I think it is really now being put at the forefront. Again, I think what is important is really the role that everyone plays. As you said, parents, even with the communities. And really, like I said, this is just everyone coming together. So with that, I'll go back to you, Akshay, for your second question. Creative network building is largely facilitated online. What lessons can local ecosystems take from here so that they are able to create the same meaningful connections and partnerships?
Sure. No, that's a brilliant question, Danny. I think the first piece around that is, I think, while it's ironical, my first point is that it needs to have a global approach, even if it's being created locally. It's very much possible today in a world that is completely ever-changing, in a world which sees a lot of mobility. Can you be global from day one? Can you bring the best of global talents in your local ecosystem right from the first day of kind of starting things off? Not just in terms of the people, but also in terms of practices. For example, we have seen in the technology ecosystem that just the fact that learning from Silicon Valley has really helped ecosystems right from Qatar to the UK to here in India, in Bangalore and Delhi, kind of really flourish seamlessly. We were not used to entrepreneurs going all out and helping each other because before we saw what's happening in Silicon Valley in the tech ecosystem. So that's kind of led to a change. I think the second piece, second core point that I would like to talk about on this one is it's really important that we create good systems within the local governments as well. In some, I believe if you have the local ecosystem support in terms of doing a lot of activities, if you have the local ecosystems kick in to do to give more support to bring the local audience in, because what also happens a lot of times when we are creating these local networks is that very unfortunately we tend to create it for people who are like us. Versus people who should really be for. So essentially, for example, if Akshay Chaturvedi is kind of creating this local ecosystem by learning something from the UK and from Qatar and from all around the world, and I will essentially, if I essentially think that, okay, I have to learn this from the foreign ecosystem, and if I essentially, this is the ecosystem I'm trying to create, I will try and create an ecosystem which looks more like me, or which is unfortunately slightly more elite in nature. Whereas the need of today, whereas the need of the next century is to have these ecosystems run very deep. In India, we talk about dividing our country into India A, India B, India C. Where in India A is these 10 million people who have credit cards, who have iPhones. And then there is this India B who once in a while shop on C, which are people who are completely unbanked. What is happening as a result of us creating networks of tomorrow is that we are going further down into segregating these different, and I'm sure this exists in all our countries, right? We are kind of going further down the road of segregating these ecosystems and creating multiple countries in one country. So one very poignant point from my side on this will be getting the help of governments, getting the help of local ecosystems to make sure that these run very deep and local infrastructure can be used. For example, in India, we have something called Aadhaar, which is a national unique identification, which everybody needs to have. We saw it work beautifully in the COVID crisis. We have seen, while we have seen a slightly different version of it in China, we saw a different version of it here in India, where people were more than willing to kind of share their information and so on and so forth. So I think technology has to move to the next level, has to benefit the next set of people, and the next set of networks that created have to be more, like you said while you were introducing this panel, they have to be more inclusive they have to be more intrinsic, and they have to be more inclusive. And so those will be my 2 key points on this: learning from the global ecosystems and being global from day zero, at the same time making sure it's very, very inclusive and it covers every last person in your current ecosystem. So when I'm saying education, I need to cover that class teacher who's teaching class 2 in a government school in a village as well. It need not be just educationists who can speak in English, who can log on to Webinar Jam, and who can essentially walk and talk just like more of us do.
Thank you very much, Akshay. I mean, it's really wonderful, to hear that. As you know, I mean, again, we're thinking of when we use technology, and a lot of the majority of kids still do not have access. And I think what we need to avoid is really to widen the gap even more. So I think use again the cooperation between governments, the private sector, in the community is very, very important. Like I said, a lot of questions there coming up for you, but I have one last question for Fatma. Fatma, how can we mobilize cultural and creative resources and best practices to support innovation and well-being challenges in education? I think I've lost you there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Dani. Film in its essence is a medium of storytelling. It's a practice that has always thrived on a personal connection. Despite the challenges posed by physical distancing and isolation, we find a way as an industry and as individuals to inspire innovation and capture the human touch in content creation. And content creators around the world continue to draw inspiration and strength from this unique situation. More so, we found a way to mobilize cultural and creative resources and keep our connections alive through universal stories that we choose to make and watch, and that tackle issues that we all must care about. Whether you're a filmmaker in India, a cinematography student in Germany, an actor in America, or a director in Palestine, we are bound by a common experience and intimately shared hope for a better world. The mobilization of resources, ideas, and sharing of best practices is also felt here in the MENA region. We're battling universal issues that are deeply relevant to the Middle East, yet in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Storytelling, if it's done with integrity and sensitivity in mind, can educate and elevate minds. It can fight misconceptions. It can create the great innovators and the problem solvers of today and tomorrow. And storytelling as a medium has always defined traditional borders set by people, distance and time. But today, it is the storyteller's deep-rooted privilege and responsibility to select narratives and issues that matters most to us and can generate meaningful change. For DFI, supporting filmmakers from around the world and across all cultural communities is a paramount as we aim to give a voice to the underrepresented segments of any society. Their voices are more relevant than ever in the context of rising awareness towards global injustice and bias, as we see today. DFI Grantees Alumni Network, for example, includes over 520 filmmakers from 70 countries. And Qatari stories are now finding global audiences, having screened in more than 40 film festivals around the world across 4 continents. The film industry has always been driven by collaboration and innovation, and I believe we have the tools and the creative spirit to unlock an even bigger window for exchange and learning, whilst keeping our human connections alive. When I took my post as CEO of the Doha Film Institute, I learned the importance of balancing the creative expression against the voices that shine a light on stories that need to be told and bring us closer as people. Of course, none of us, myself included, could ever foreseen that the world will come to a time when our traditional forms of expression and communication would be limited or cut off entirely. And yet, I believe this experience opened an entirely new world of creative and human interaction that echoes a very personal need for connection that we find with each other. Stories are universal, and the stories of this time will leave a lasting imprint in our societies. They are stories of connection found in a time of distance and the humanity found in the midst of fear. Whether we reach one person or an entire community, the creative arts have the power to rise above the mere value of entertainment and generate an incredible impact, of course, in education also. In this unprecedented era where access to information and learning is suddenly a question for all segments of society, not just those traditionally affected by limited opportunities, we need to experiment and discover new best practices where whether it's new digital formats for conversations or online events. We must explore solutions and clear obstacles that stand in the way of our ability to connect and collaborate with each other as a global community of thinkers and dreamers and storytellers alike.
Thank you, Fatma. And I think I'm fortunate enough to be based in Doha, because I think the culture is very much alive. And again, I think we just realizing now that really art, culture, and films are really, really very, very useful at this time of the pandemic. And I think we should encourage that more. As you know, UNESCO is also, it has a mandate on culture, and then we're also organizing lots of webinars on it. I have a lot of questions for you, but I think I'll just give priority to our participants here. So this one is addressed to all you three panelists. So the question is actually from Neha Rahil. So how do you deal with the loss of experiential learning through all five senses on digital platforms, i.e. how to ensure human connection in relationships is maintained through digital platform? So Rosie first, perhaps, and then Fatma.
Thank you, Dani. Yeah, it's a great question, and I suppose it's worth saying at this from the outset that digital learning and digital connection will never replace that real kind of value that you gain from being with other people, having in-person experiences, and that sort of multi-sensory experiential learning. So digital can sort of mediate some of that loss, but that we're now experiencing particularly, but it will never replace, and it will never be in our totally alternative mode. Having said that, and I was inspired by many of the things Fatma said about thinking particularly about the role of arts and culture and storytelling, I think we can think about creating interesting digital experiences that do enable people to have that sort of relational learning experience in sort of different ways, and that's maybe through different modes of learning, through different kind of creative formats, whether it's sort of webinar rooms, whether it's kind of social interaction, social media interactions, digital storytelling. There's other ways of sort of thinking about how we can create those connections through the multiplicity of digital means we now have available. But I think the starting point is, digital will never replace the real value of in-person human connection, particularly when it comes to learning. But we're now in a position where we do have to rethink, at least for a period of time, and blended learning is likely to become the norm, under social distancing kind of guidelines, particularly when schools reopen. We don't know what that's going to look like. Certainly, I'm sure from my perspective, people are still working out plans, but I think there's an opportunity there to kind of reimagine, to rethink the role of digital actually as we go forward.
This is exactly the motive of our session. I will go to Fatma first, and then to Akshay, if you don't mind.
Yeah, this is a question that was in our mind every time we planned for something. As I told you, Qumrah was supposed to happen on the ground, and 2 weeks ahead of Qumrah, we've decided to completely digitize the whole edition. And this is something that we know in the beginning that we will lose this human connection that is built each time all of these participants and experts come together and have a face-to-face discussions about their films and their projects. There's nothing that can replace the human interaction and face-to-face interaction. And this goes the same also for our next big event, Ajyal Film Festival, which will happen in November. And now us going through all of these discussions, how can we create the atmosphere and the experience that we've been able to create in the past 7 editions for our jurors? And for people who don't know, Ajyal Film Festival, the jury comprises of 500 kids and young men and women from the ages 8 till 21 from around 40 countries. They come all together in one space in Qatar, here in Qatar, and they share this experience for a week. How can you replace that in a digital format? There is nothing that can replace it, unfortunately, but what we can do is find solutions, small solutions. So, for example, maybe give the chance for a smaller number of this group of jurors to come and attend and be in the physical space using this social distancing and all of these measures that we have to use for the time being. But nothing will replace that human connection. Nothing will replace it for us, for our kids especially. And this is, it's kind of a continuation to a conversation that used to happen before COVID-19, which is also the disconnection because of social media, because of video gaming and everything. So it's kind of now expanded on and exploded on a bigger level for all of us. And it makes us really now as educators and parents and adults put ourselves in our kids' shoes, who's now used to this type of connection digitally, and really think the way they are thinking, and questioning everything that we used to know before, because now we're in their shoes and we're experiencing what they're experiencing. So I think it's a very interesting time, and we should look at it on a positive light, not on a negative one, where we can explore really human potential that is very adaptable to all situations. And this is the key for our survival in the world. So I think this is interesting, and we will come up with, I think, very innovative solutions for all of these issues that we're facing today.
Thank you. Very interesting point. I'll comment on that, but first I'll give the floor to Akshay. I know you have the same question. I think you get it. Thank you.
Sure, and no, pretty much echo the same sentiments. 100% virtual can't replace. I have a bias. I have to say that even more because I got logged off from this twice in the last 15-20 minutes. So 100% virtual can't be replacing what real life actually is. But I guess, I think what a bunch of universities, for example, we work with about 100 plus universities across the world, in Australia, New Zealand, UK, Canada, US. And what we are seeing is that more than technology, more than a bunch of tools integrated within the same set of learning platforms, we are seeing more human beings around that technology is really helping. For example, if I am in a classroom of 50 people, can I instead also have 2 teaching assistants? Somebody is delivering the class, somebody is asking me if I'm getting it right or not after every question. Somebody is there to kind of answer my doubts on the side as well. I can pause, reverse. So there's a celebrity teacher who's essentially the best, who's the best guy to teach somebody. But there are other people who are essentially integrated, who are essentially solving doubts, who are doing something else. We're doing something like that in our online live learning classes platform as well. So of course, some of these things will make it easier. They might make it slightly more convenient. But again, I don't think any user or any teacher right now who are at the center of this, and not the companies per se, right? The companies, of course, want everything to be online. Their stock price is rising. But I think the real folks who essentially this matters to, who are using it at the time, they don't agree with it. And I kind of side with that view mostly, that we really will have to figure out a way to socially distance ourselves, be safe, and remove to more of those safer learning environments. That is already happening in universities. We have the infrastructure for it. I think another thing that happens, I would just like to add, is I think we take universities very lightly, which we should not. These are folks who have kind of given us the cure of biggest diseases. They've done some of the biggest inventions over time. So of course, they have the wherewithal to kind of figure out the solution for something like this as well. And the future is more blended. The future is more online plus offline with the best of both worlds. It definitely is not completely virtual, at least for the foreseeable 15, 20 years, till the time it's built completely ground.
Thank you, Akshay. I mean, it's like the blended learning is really important too. And just as we rely too much on technology, human connection is very, very important. It's something we really have to keep. I have another question here for the three of you. So again, let me start with Rosie. How can multi-sectoral networks enable innovation in post-pandemic world? We already talked about the post-pandemic world. Thank you.
I think it's another really good question, and thinking of the phrase that Fatma used earlier about the sort of global spirit of solidarity. I think what we're seeing is kind of multi-sector networks really mobilizing to respond to either localized or national challenges at hand. So you've got almost that sort of galvanization around a kind of a shared purpose and a shared mission, which is a sort of fundamental for creating really effective multi-stakeholder collaboration. So I think in some ways the pandemic has sort of sharpened the mind and the focus on certain challenges. I think particularly sort of inequity and inequality of access. And some of the sort of gender issues that were highlighted in our keynote. So it certainly brought a sort of sharp focus to people's minds and exposed all of those kind of existing undercurrents of inequalities that have been sort of bubbling for many, many years. So I think that possibly will be proved to be helpful in the long term, that kind of real galvanization around a shared purpose. But there has to be a sort of an ongoing momentum and sort of organizing function around these kind of multi-sector collaborations. So one of the pieces of work we do a lot with in the Weaving Lab is think about new forms of civic leadership or kind of political or educational leadership that are going to be needed to really tackle some of these entrenched problems that have existed for decades and remain unsolved. So really thinking about the sort of leadership behaviours, the kind of organisational structures that are needed, the kind of governance arrangements, the funding arrangements to catalyse and to keep partnership working, really sort of grounded and focused and evolving and adapting and kind of learning as we go. So for me, I think there's a job of work to really rethink the types of partnership models that we're creating. How can they be sustainable? What does new forms of leadership look like, both nationally in terms of government, but particularly at more localized levels where the resources are needing to be mobilized and deployed really quickly in response to certain issues. So for me, it's a kind of multi-layered, multifaceted question. But I think there's something around the focus that the pandemic has brought in terms of people's minds, which may prove to be galvanizing in the long term.
So before I get to Fatma and Akshay, I mean, I really like the idea of this multi-level cooperation. For example, as you know, UNESCO has established, with other agencies, this global coalition for education. And you would be surprised at the number of the private sector, the companies that really want to be able to help, be in across the world, and prioritizing countries where it's really needed. But at the same time, we really need to have that kind of partnership and cooperation at the local level. So on to you, Fatma, and then Akshay.
Well, there's never been a time where we're all in the same pot together, feeling the same pain, going through the same challenges, going through the same fears. Yes, before we used to hear about a war there or a crisis here, but we can, be emotional about it and try to feel what others are feeling, but really you're still disconnected. Now this is a time where we're all feeling the same feelings. And the humanity of us is kicking in, and to thinking, okay, if I'm going through this and you're going through this, we have to stick together for us to be able to go through this together and come out on the other side, maybe not winning everything and not losing everything, but at least being able to continue and being able to continue with our education, continue with our work. There's industries are being shattered as we see it today, and it's a very risky for us to continue this way. So if we don't come together and work together, there is no way for us to survive this pandemic. And this is a great learning opportunity for all of us to really value the power of network, the power of collaboration, the power of partners now more than ever. And for me personally, I really value, we valued all the partners that we had before, but now we see them in a completely different light. We cannot survive without them. We cannot do what we need to do or reach the people we need to reach without them. And it's really fascinating to see them on this different light and appreciate them more. And I'm really sure that after this, we will just continue to strengthen these networks and find even more and more connections with other entities in Qatar and around the world to continue building what we need to build.
Thank you. I mean, it really kind of highlight that, we're all in the same boat, the haves and the have-nots, no one is spared, by this pandemic. And I think cooperation is more needed. Akshay, you.
Sure. You can hear me, right, Dani, right? Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. No, so this is absolutely, absolutely kind of have very similar sentiments to what Rosie and Fatima said. And I think, moreover, I think we should look at this time as one where education as an industry can learn from healthcare as an industry, right? We are seeing that research that is happening in China or in US is immediately kind of, it reaches the scientists of Qatar. What is happening in Qatar reaches Oxford. What's happening at Oxford immediately reaches Melbourne. But that's not the case for online learning. That's not the case for education. Why can't something which is happening in Qatar not known in Bangalore? Why something which is happening in Bangalore not known in Tokyo? So I think, of course, it's a crazy time, and I love the point. I love 2 points that Fatma made, which I think are very relevant. One is about, we really don't think about how the users are looking at it. We really can't essentially right now peek into the children's brain and figure out what would they be essentially thinking about this new normal that we kind of keep harping about all the time in all panels on Twitter and everywhere else. And the second piece is about, again, the interdependability, I think, which is badly needed. And I think while a lot of conferences like these, panels like these, we celebrate the fact that education moved forward in the last decade. But I think still we have a lot of steps to walk on our mission towards integrating education globally in a far more cohesive manner so that we can learn from each other. I think healthcare has shown a way in this during this global pandemic that can happen. And if we can do something similar, that will be like amazing.
Very much. I think we have one, we're running out of time, but just one last question, and I will really like ask you to be very, very brief. This is a question from Anja Nielsen. What kind of leaders are we developing and championing? Really in a few seconds, because we have to wrap up. Thank you. Rosie, and then Fatma, and then...
The key question, really. I mean, in terms of the leaders that we're developing and championing, I'd really hope that through this experience we're championing change makers, people who are stepping up in their local communities, they're getting stuff done, they're modeling a new type of leadership, they're building relationships, they're building networks, and bringing people into the conversation about leadership that would never have thought of themselves as leaders. So, I'd like to see kind of change-making type skills, become much more prominent, or weaving skills, as we would call them. That would be my hope.
Fatma, quickly, and then
For a lot of the work that we do, we're always trying to achieve global citizens. Global citizens is something that we always talk about when we talk about our jurors and the youth, and how we talk to them, and how we what we expect from them, and everything that we create for them as an experience. So for us, creating these global citizens is the most important thing for us.
That's really very good. Ending up, we have lost Akshay. So I will use this. Oh, Akshay is back, but we have to wrap up now. So Akshay, a couple of minutes, a second, sorry.
Sure. No, again, very similar comments. Danny, believe that things to be thought in a very different way than they are right now. There needs to be more interdependency between different countries, and we need more panels like these. We need more thought leaders to come together and ensure that the innovation is reaching the last mile. Innovation should not be captured within the existing ecosystems only. It needs to break through and it needs to reach the last mile now more than ever.
Thank you. I think we can go on with the discussion. Really interesting insights here, but unfortunately, we ran out of time. So I just would like to thank you all, panelists. Rosie, Fatma, and Akshay, and also our participants. For the insightful questions. Make sure that you also participate in the poll and continue watching this. And thanks again. Over to you, Amina.
Thank you so much, Danilo. Thank you again, Danilo, Rosie, Fatma, and Akshay. I really enjoyed listening to your insights during this panel. I think my main takeaway from this session is that nothing replaces, as you have all mentioned, nothing replaces human connection. But we need to look at the opportunities that the current situation crises pose and make the best out of the ecosystems that we have through collaboration and partnerships. And as you mentioned, Fatma, we need each other to survive. I'm sure as WISE, thank you, Akshay, for thinking of us as a platform to continue this conversation. As WISE, we are definitely going to continue such important conversations and debates throughout our platforms. So thank you very much for joining us today. I would like to share with you where we stand with our poll question around barriers to education systems. I think most of you have voted creating more transparent pathways to sharing resources and information. This is, I think, one of the top voted answers. With this, we come to the end of the segment. We will move to a 15-minute break. And we'll see you in another 15 minutes. Stay tuned. Enjoy, grab a cup of coffee, take a few breaths, stretch, and we'll see you soon.
Hello, testing, testing.
You are being heard. That's great. The testing.
Okay, great.
Welcome.
So when it's green, that's when I'm speaking, right? I've lost you.
Sorry, when the mic is green, that means you turned on your mic.
Okay, great.
That means the rest of us can hear you.
Okay,
so good to see you on the screen.
So then I just turn both on again when you call me out, right?
Yes, in a few minutes when we're back, we're going to call you out and you turn on your mic and camera.
Perfect.
Perfect. See you soon.
See you soon.
We are going to resume in the next 2 minutes. We're excited for you to join us again. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good short break. I think one of the beauties of this, of such virtual convenings is that you can watch and listen from the comfort of your home, office, sofa, exercising probably on your treadmill. If you have not already, I would advise you to take some deep breaths, stretch as we continue our next session. For those of us who were with us from the beginning of the day, we had a lot of interesting speakers and discussions around resilience and the way forward beyond COVID-19 and learnings from all of those experiences. Our next segment is very interesting. It's titled Hear My Story. This is a series of presentations from key speakers on how our systems can be reformed to better reflect our modern world context and become more resilient to future challenges. And here, I would like to remind the audience to post your questions on the chat feature again and mark them with the question icon. Our moderator for this session is our own team member, Victoria Besma. Victoria is a former teacher and education consultant. She has joined WISE and responsible for supporting the EdTech track, which includes working with entrepreneurs to create a positive impact within education. And Victoria, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Amina, and all of you for joining us in our first Hear My Story session. The central question of this session really looks to unpack how we can leverage this moment of uncertainty to drive towards significant changes that may not have been possible before. We talk a lot about resilience, but what do we really want to preserve in our education systems, and what should we be instead trying to reform? Our three speakers today will be sharing their unique perspectives on this issue. Our first speaker, Dr. Sean Holroyd from Cornell University, has over 20 years experience in administration and teaching at universities around the world. This has included time in student administration, residential life, course directorship, and curriculum development. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Holroyd.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And I'll start my speech by just sharing the screen with everyone. So my story is as a course director of a first year course at Weill Cornell Medicine that takes up the whole of the second semester. And I'll be discussing how, from what's happened with COVID, I believe that we can reinvent the leadership within our college to move to a more rapid shift towards systemic leadership. And this is from my perspective as a course director. So what sort of leader is the classic course director? Well, the course director is really a manager of the course and looks after the course as it runs for the students and the associated faculty within the course. At Weill Cornell Medicine, the course director gets information from our colleagues in New York, from the New York campus, from our academic deans, as well as from the curriculum committee. And really, in the higher echelons, we already have quite a lot of systemic leadership, and there's a lot of stakeholder involvement in the decision-making process. However, when we get to the course director, things sort of change slightly. What we can see here is that the course director interacts with the unit leads that run various units within the course, the IT staff that look after the audiovisual and computer software, various support staff that help administer the course, run exams, library services and so on, and obviously, of course, students as well too. But as you can see from this diagram, a lot of the interactions are with the course director and each area individually. I must admit there is some exceptions and there is a bit of grouping together, but not really much. So what happened when COVID came? Well, the course director really had to change their leadership in order to move the course from being an on-campus course to an online course. And what we did was we got everyone together in a group. So now everyone was talking together. We had the unit leads, the IT staff and the support staff working together so that we could rapidly change from an on-campus to an online program. And we were enabled to make this change within a couple of days and cause the less disruption possible to the students. However, we still had one major problem in the running of the course, and that was with regards, how can we proctor the exams? How can we run the exams? The students wanted exams in order to help them continue on their study progress. But how could we do this online? So we brought the students in, and so now we had everyone together talking. And what we found was that it gave us the ability to make decisions on the spot. And very quickly, we were able to work out an online proctoring system that allowed us and the students to continue on with the course without affecting the integrity of the exams. So that was what we did, but how can this affect what we do in the future? Well, I think the thing that we learned was that when you have a collective input into the leadership and the management of a course, you get much better outcomes, and these outcomes are a lot quicker. So I've just had approved by our curriculum committee to run a pilot program beginning in October of this year. The course starts in January, where we get together all the stakeholders. So we're going to have group meetings on a regular basis, getting everyone together prior to the course. So all stakeholders will be involved, and our decisions will be based on a group consensus wherever possible. The members of this group would be the course director, myself. We'll have past students involved because they will be able to give input from their experience. We'll have the current students involved because they need to be involved in what they think is important for them with regards to the course. The support staff will be there to give their experience over the years in running the course, and also to be able to make decisions how they can administer things, support the course better with their various services. The unit leads will be there as well too, because they'll be able to talk about things specific to their own sections of the course. And obviously we'll also have the IT staff involved because they will be able to make sure that we can drive this from a computer software way. So coming back to the original question, do we need to reinvent leadership to build resilience, or do we work on what we already have? And I think what we can do here is we can work on what we already have. So the course director can become a much more systemic leader. And with the course director becoming a much more systemic leader, I believe that's going to build resilience within the course. And so this is really working at the coalface of the university. We're going to include all the stakeholders, so everyone feels they're going to have some form of possession of the course. We'll be able to learn from these stakeholders. So instead of the course director making decision on his own, he'll be getting information from everyone at the same time. So there's going to be a lot of input. It'll be a smaller group, and it will be the people that are actually involved in the course. And so therefore, they're going to feel more comfortable and more confident in bringing forth their ideas and opinions. This will lead, obviously, there'll be better communication. Everyone will know what everyone else is doing. And it will allow us, probably most importantly here, to focus on the important things. So we'll be able to work more efficiently towards making a better course. This will enable us to prioritise the changes that we make, which are most important to everyone. And finally, what we'll do is we'll report back to the curriculum committee. So in summary, everyone will have a stake in the management and smooth running of the course. And I believe that this will lead to a better educational outcome and give all stakeholders the satisfaction of having a sense of ownership in the course, and hopefully lead to a much better experience for everyone involved.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that great presentation. And you've given a really good comprehensive view of how the smaller pieces of the puzzle within an academic institution can come together. We have a question from the audience that I think is really interesting. How might we motivate students to embrace online learning when they may have some resistance to being immersed in the virtual space?
It's an interesting question, because already we have a mix of online learning prior to COVID, because we get video streamed lectures coming from our colleagues in Cornell in the New York campus. And so our students are actually quite used to receiving this sort of information in this way. I think you'll find it's a bit of a mix. Some students really love the online learning. They embrace it, they love it, and it really works well for them. But I think you find other students really miss the interaction with their colleagues, and it really helps them to focus on their study, having other people around them and talking with them on a regular basis. So I think it's a lot to do with the personality of the student and how they can control their process of getting together, settling down and setting a good timetable. So for some, it can work and it can be quite a smooth transition. For others, it's quite difficult. And when this happened with us, we did our best to identify these students. And then what we did was we set up regular Zoom meetings and tried to give them a bit more of that feeling of being part of a group, which they were missing by feeling isolated and online. So I think when you move online, you still have to keep that personal interaction going and maintain a lot of live lessons wherever you possibly can.
And I guess even if we're moving online, it's still important to allow the students to have that agency and feel, as you say, connected to their communities, whether it's the student groups, their teachers, and the wider school as well. Yeah,
I think so. And I think especially within the student group, because students get a lot of support from each other. And if they're sitting at home and they don't have that, even the general conversation, and I'd always make sure when I hold Zoom meetings that I'd open it up early and the students didn't have to sit in a waiting room, they could come straight in and we'd start having just a normal conversation, something natural that we do before a class as well too, and just have a chat. And so people were laughing and smiling, which hopefully they do during a lesson anyway, but they were just a normal social conversation. And I think that's very helpful as well too, because that can really be lacking if you're isolated within your own bedroom at home.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for helping us kick off this session in such an interesting way. Thank you again for your time. I'd now like to welcome our second speaker, Jaya Ramchandani, a faculty member at UWC ISIC Japan and the director of the Story of Foundation, a non-profit based in India, focused on lifelong and life-wide learning. Jaya, over to you.
Hi. Thank you so much, Victoria, Amina, and all the wonderful speakers here today for the key insights. Apart from teaching, I actively research best practices in learning and education, and I'm here to share some things I've gleaned. To start off with, I'm just trying to figure out how to change the slide. Yeah, got it. So to start off with, I'd like to highlight 4 key transformations that everyone in the world of education needs to start thinking about. The first transformation has to do with changing our way of seeing the purpose of education from something to get a job and work concentrated in youth and childhood to more learning to meet individual and collective needs across a lifetime. So not only learning to meet needs of financial security and purposeful work, but also strong relationships, meaningful community, good health, and a better world. A lot of curricula like the IB and schools like the United World Colleges have started to focus on the full range and not just the odd alternative school, moving away from a more academic curriculum. The next transformation is about power. Who decides what you learn? The traditional setting is someone knows better what is good for you. And a shockingly high number of education leaders are white men, so I'm happy to see that changing in this room today. And if you are from the global south, you don't even have a heritage of curricula that is homegrown and necessarily relevant. It was forced and now adapted from some global north country. The trend is shifting towards shared agency and the recognition of learning frameworks that are also more agile to needs. As Sean just demonstrated in his work as a course director, frameworks are beautiful tools because they allow play, freedom within some overall criteria or constraints, and are arrived at through systems thinking or emergent thinking. So rather than all the objectives being pre-decided, some can be decided by the state or society, some by administrators, faculty, and students themselves. This naturally demands not only formal systems of learning, but integrating more informal and non-formal ways, online and face-to-face, like internships, expeditions, and workshops into the mix. Then there is the transformation around what is best. It relates to agency, but learning theories itself have evolved with time. There are many isms: behaviorism, where the learner is passive in response to stimuli, to constructivism, where the learner is active and builds on personal experience, to connectivism, a new theory for digital times, where the learner is self-directed and connects nodes across a network. This term self-direction first appears very heavily in research on adult learning, but is also proving to be true for children and youth. They have intrinsic motivation and the ability to be more responsible for their learning than we give them credit for. They just don't have enough power to act. All the isms hold some truth in practice depending on the willingness to learn and the agency of the learner. What I mean by this is if I have to learn a language but I don't have a high amount of motivation, I still need some traditional methods to get me on a roll until my internal motivation can kick in and I can have more agency over my learning. The fourth transformation is around how we can know or show what we are learning. The education scene has become quite evolved, but not widespread enough in reflective practices, which really helps put the focus of knowing yourself and where you are at. That said, the showing someone else component in assessment is really prevalent because a lot of the top universities still do not take in people unless they have a score above X. So here the real question is, what is stopping universities from innovating on their admissions? I'm personally so happy that a number of exams were cancelled because a lot of innovations are happening at a small scale, like the mastery transcript or diplomas being stitched together with a combination of short courses, expeditionary learning, and project-based learning. And how can universities stop putting this restriction of, I want an easy process to admit students? There are a lot of methods like portfolios of reflection and practice, experience, and recommendations that can also serve as the necessary proof that someone is competent enough to thrive in your program, if that is what you're looking for. The next thing I wanted to focus on is the who decides part, or learner agency. There is a lot of literature around how we want learners to be self-regulated, self-directed, and self-determined in the 21st century. But to do that, we have to make systems to give power away. Usually with the regulations of academic programs, changes are possible at the classroom level as the learning objectives come predefined, also negotiable, but it takes more time for change. But for school-based programs, innovation can start tomorrow. Giving power to act to students can start tomorrow. For example, the online world makes it possible for me not only to sign up for the course by a teacher in my school, but from many other educators across the world. Personally, I'm a proponent of meeting both individual and collective needs. Some the individual may be aware of, and some they need time to understand why something is needed. But then trust and relationship building needs to be a part of the system both ways. A recent work I came across, Rubin's 4 tendencies, was pretty insightful in terms of there are some people, like Sean mentioned, who are intrinsically self-determined, who are not intrinsically self-determined or motivated, and many prefer to be other-directed. It is still not clear if it is a nature-nurture thing, personality thing, or the socio-cultural and socio-economic influences of this, but self-direction, which is more about planning your own learning, can be taught as a process of framing, planning, doing, reflecting, shifting, and sharing. And over time, it can become a learned habit to give learners more agency or more power to act. The final thing I wanted to highlight was when we empower learners to act, we make it easier for them to be lifelong and life-wide learners to achieve those goals of financial security, purposeful work, strong relationships, good health, meaningful community, and a better world. And what we also need is more opportunities for lifelong and life-wide learning that move beyond this space of childhood and youth or just job-based training, like what we are trying to do at the Story of Foundation. A lot of things influence our agency and access, our education, socioeconomic conditions, as well as sociocultural influences. You can have a lot of self-determination, but no access, or a lot of access and just no will. So the sweet spot of lifelong learning lies in the meeting point of agency and access. The culture of agency has to change with schools because schools are kind of what stamps it out. Schools need to start focusing on increasing learner agency, and new institutions and non-institutions alike need to focus on creating more opportunities to learn with the good conditions of learning through the course of one's life. A question that I ask is, why do people stop learning? And a lot of times the response is they don't know where to learn, access to a mentor, time and money, and essentially spaces and environments that institutions create for learning. Let's say I aspire to run a social business. I need to learn the skills around it. So I still need a system of people and places where I can learn stuff and be scaffolded in a manner that fits into my life. And I need to know that I need this system. So 4 transformations, starting with rethinking how institutions do learner agency and cultivate self-direction for lifelong learning, are some places to start to reform our systems to being more resilient for the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I know our WISE community always appreciate having kind of practical tools to help them in their spaces. So thank you again so much for that. You've highlighted here the importance of learner agency, and I think this has become a real topic of interest, at least specifically within the last couple of months.
Yeah.
How do you think agency in the classroom can affect children's development and their relationship with society as a whole?
I think, so I run my classes in a self-directed style. And one thing that was really interesting was when we had to switch online, it was pretty much no trouble because they were already used to the system of self-planning and deciding what resources they need. But I would actually like in 2 slides ago where there were changes at the classroom level, agency at the classroom level, agency at the curriculum level, and agency at the policy level. I feel like, especially I work in a high school, so they do have a lot of ideas about what is good for them to learn, sometimes better than the faculty themselves. And if we started to listen more and hear and incorporate what they wanted to learn and not just feel that we know better, we are essentially empowering them for tomorrow.
Yes, that works as well with a lot of the project-based learning types of directives. A lot of schools are implementing now. So that works really well. Well, thank you so much, Jaya, for sharing your insights with us today. I'm sure you've sparked some new ideas in our attendees.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our final speaker, last but not least, Mike Furyk, the founder and CEO of Allison, one of the world's largest free online learning platforms for basic education and workplace skills. Mike, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Victoria, and hello, everyone. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to everyone. So my view here is that we don't build resilience, and it'll be no surprise to you that we really need to change the system. The system is already in crisis. COVID didn't just bring it. The fact is that 93% of people around the world have never been to college. So we need a system that's far, far more accessible for education. We need to educate everybody, and we need to educate them now. You know, the systems that are there are just too slow, they're too expensive, they're not broad enough, not deep enough, they can't reach everyone. So I'm just going to present 3 slides, which I believe present just a fundamental, I wouldn't say undermining, but just disruption, I guess, of the current system, and also the promise of what is there. And of course, it's brought mainly by technology and the fact that people are up for actually using technology, because technology may change, but behavior often comes behind it. So just as a bit of credibility, Allison has nearly 16 million people online, about 3 million graduates, and about 2,000 free courses. And so we're not just talking about it, we're doing it. So just to begin with, the first slide I want to show you is that, can you actually, let me go back to so the first slide is just, it is possible to put all knowledge and skills training online for free. Now, we're already doing it for 2,000 courses, but the fact is that anyone can go on to Allison and study for free. It's advertising and certification optional based in terms of costs, but the truth is that anybody can go on, and that's a working model. It's going for 13 years, so we've proven it. So let's take that as a given. You can create a sustainable, scalable platform for free education. You mightn't like the advertising, it's minimized, and someday it actually may go entirely from the system. But people can access education for free. The other thing is that publishing. People don't see on the Allison platform that there's actually a whole publishing universe where people can go on, learn how to use our publishing tool for free, and publish whatever they want. And they can publish in any language, on any subject, in any level, and again, get their content out to anyone worldwide. So we have a situation where and it's not just Allison, so I don't want to be mentioning Allison too much. I want to talk about the fundamentals. Technology is allowing us to do this, is to present knowledge for free, giving everybody the tools and the training for free to actually go up and put on what they know. So what we're trying to do is to allow a world where actually there's a free flow of knowledge and skills training across everybody. And what we're trying to do, and certainly I'm personally trying to do, is to drive all costs of education down to zero. And we're doing it and succeeding. And really how we're doing it is the scale of the platform. We have to make only cents from each individual that comes on the website to actually pay our bills. So that disruption, it's a $4 trillion business, but we're driving every cost to zero where we can. So we're hopefully reducing this entire educating the world for adults down to a business that's in the billions, not in the trillions, and then releasing an enormous amount of money available for free for other things. So if you can learn anything anywhere, you can be tested on anything anywhere. So let's just leave that point with you. The second point I want to talk to you about is that, when I was saying about 93% of the world have never been to college, well, how do we assess how smart they are? A lot of companies around the world talk about skill shortages. Well, why wouldn't there be when they're only actually trying to hire college graduates, which are only 7% of the world? How do we assess how smart people are around the world? Well, the truth is we can do this. In the US, in particular, there's a lot of companies that aren't going to formal education in terms of hiring people anymore. They're just saying, well, let's set them tests. They sent them personality tests, cognitive skills, what's their verbal reasoning, what's their numeracy reasoning, what's their abstract reasoning like. These tests are always been expensive. Some of us have had the privilege of doing them. They've always cost a couple of $100. The truth is they don't need to cost a couple of $100. They can be free. And in fact, we've launched a free personality test, and we'll have the free cognitive skills tests later on this year. What that enables the world to do is for everyone to go on and actually see how smart they are in various different ways, and be able to present to potential employers saying, hey, I have strengths here, I have strengths there. But what's key is self-knowledge, because there's an enormous number of people around the world that are being told that they're not smart unless they've paid college an awful lot of money and they have a piece of paper. But actually, we all know this is not true. We all know that we've met people in remote countries that are as smart as we've ever met. Now, how do we get these people in? Well, what we do is we can assess just how smart they are by just asking them questions, and in that way make them available for potential hiring and grooming and development, mainly through online virtual systems. But it allows the whole world to actually engage. And the third point, final slide, is just that with this knowledge, if you allow anybody, anywhere, to study any subject in their language, they then combine that with the capability of the person. Almost look at like a computer. When you look at a computer has the memory, which can be looked at knowledge, and then the RAM in terms of the intelligence and the processing power. Well, this is what we're doing with people here. We're making unlimited knowledge and skills training, capable of learning knowledge and skills available. And then actually we're seeing, well, how strong is this computer? How strong is this person? And if they're, and what we can do is identify what their weaknesses are, their strengths, and develop them. And then on the other side, what we do is we go to the employers. Most employers hire in a very, very lazy way. They put out a short job description and a short, description of the person they want to hire, and they try and go from there. But actually, they can do a lot better. They can, on the reverse of this system, they can ask a lot more questions and actually do a lot more hiring, but then open up their hiring to the world. So I'll just finish there in saying that I believe there is a change coming in education and training that is a phenomenal tsunami. And an example I often come back to is that in 1900 in the US, there was a situation that the motor car was just invented, and 5% of transport was the motor car in 1900. By 1920, only 5% was not motorized. The entire carriage industry was gone. You're going to see the same thing here, because technology is coming. These systems are there. They're free. They're very deep. People can access them in the way that they need to access them. It just takes a bit of learning and getting used to it. So maybe I'll leave it there, Victoria, and take a question or two.
Thank you so much, Mike. So, you touched on this a little bit during your presentation. Technology's long been a tool that in and of itself was expected to reform education. But we know that it's in fact a much more nuanced interaction between technology and the larger ecosystem of students, teachers, and the world of work. How do you predict that this relationship will continue to evolve?
Well, the thing is, you have to acknowledge that education is a really big business, and it's very political. I mean, it's one of the most fragmented industries in the world, and that's political because knowledge is power. So people have kept it to themselves. Nations have said, I'm not going to take the standard of the other country because actually I don't want them to control it. But what's happening is that you're able to go direct to people. I've talked last week with some people in Africa. We have 400,000 people in Nigeria, and I was talking with a fellow online supplier into Nigeria, and it's great that the government doesn't need to be involved, and they can be involved because we have an individual personal relationship with every learner, and it doesn't matter that they're in Nigeria. And what I love about the fact is that the same education is given to the chap or person in Nigeria as we give to the person in California. So, but in terms of the reticence, it's a very big business. There's huge status quo. Universities and colleges should be disintermediated in a huge number of areas. They're charging too much for too little, and it's inevitable that that demise is on their way outside of some areas where they actually provide value, which is in their locality and extreme expertise. I'm sure I'll get a response on that.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your insights, and those, of course, of your colleagues today, Dr. Sean Holroyd and Jaya Ramchandani. We very much appreciate your time. If you in the audience have any thoughts on the ideas shared by our speakers, do please make sure that you tweet us at @wise_tweets using the hashtag Education Reimagined. Sean, thank you again very much.
Thank you, Victoria, Sean, Jaya, and Mike. It was really interesting listening to you. Very interesting points on building resilience in our institutions and systems moving forward. Our next session will focus on the expertise of practitioners and examine how to harness innovation to decrease the equity gap and reorient the system so that every learner can thrive in an ever-changing world. Those interesting dialogues will be moderated by Mariana Abdo, the Managing Director at the Center for Evidence and Implementation. Mary, as she likes to be called, has worked on the ground with key advisors and senior public administrators who lead education policy on matters relating to K-12 education reform, sustainability, improvement in higher education, and the establishment of education-focused foundations and more. Welcome, Mary. It's a pleasure to have you with us again, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this session. So thank you very much to WISE for hosting this dialogue on the theme of accelerating progress by leveraging innovation. Thank you to the sponsors and the partners for their support, and to our wonderful panelists for being here today. My name is Mary Abdo, and I am the Managing Director of the Center for Evidence and Implementation, which is a global social enterprise advisory firm dedicated to ensuring the best evidence is implemented in policy and practice to support vulnerable communities. It is a particular pleasure for me to moderate this panel today because my relationship with WISE dates back to 2012. And in that time that I've been a part of this vibrant network, I've noticed that WISE really always pushes us to think about reimagining education. And in the face of recent disruptions to global education, this platform is even more critical. I wanted to offer a few framing remarks before we begin our session. So these dialogues are focused on education disrupted. And of course, there's been a lot of dialogue over the last day or two about the fact that the estimates are that 1.5 billion children, so 90% of the world's school-going population, were unable to attend school in the last 2 to 3 months. And that universities around the world, of course, have canceled in-person studies, some into 2021. For marginalized communities, in particular, there are deep concerns about whether children, particularly girls, will return to school. So, of course, Safina Hussein this morning has said before that given the experiences in Liberia after the Ebola crisis, it's predicted that the rates of out-of-school children will dramatically increase post the COVID crisis, potentially as much as 2 or 3 times the existing numbers. So we're clearly at a moment of great crisis, and yet we're also at a moment where there's openness to change and experimentation to reimagine education. So today, we will be looking at how we can leverage innovation to accelerate progress, particularly in light of the current crisis. And we'll be specifically exploring leapfrogging within education ecosystems to address inequality, and then looking at leveraging innovations in schools themselves. We'll have 2 back-to-back dialogues, each of about 20 to 25 minutes, with, if we can manage it, a short question and answer after each one. And for each dialogue, I'll be joined by 2 of our speakers. So with me today to explore these topics are really some incredible panelists. So let's meet 2 of them now for our first dialogue on leapfrogging inequality and leveraging existing innovations. I'll be joined by Megan Falone from Barefoot College and Surya Karki from United World Schools. Megan is the CEO and director of Barefoot College International. She's also the 2018 Hillary Institute laureate for her global leadership in the areas of climate change, poverty reduction, social justice, and economic empowerment of women. And Surya is the country director and co-founder of the United World Schools in Nepal. Since its founding in 2015, this organization has gone on from a simple idea to 34 schools and 5,200 children who are hard at work to make education their ticket to a bright future. So can I just check that we've got Megan here, I can see. And Surya, are you also on the line? I just want to verify that you are also with us.
I am.
Can I hear you? Surya, you're here. That's great. And Megan, you're here. Fantastic. So Megan, why don't you get us started? So before we start, actually, I wanted to call our audience's attention to these polls. We'll be closing the polls in a moment. But if you look on the right side of your screen, you should see a little option to participate in some polls. We'll do 2 polls during our session. The first poll is up now. So in 10 years' time, are we likely to look back on COVID-19 as something that helped or hindered educational equity and improvements in quality and access? And so let's just give it 20 more seconds. Actually, I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay, get those answers in. I'm just going to end the poll now. Okay, well, what we can see, and I'd love for Megan and Surya to maybe reflect on some of these poll results in their comments. I'll have a few structured questions, but I'd love for you to comment on this. Clearly, we have a very optimistic group responding. All 400 of them are very confident that this is a catalytic and helpful moment for education.
Yes or no.
So just let's get started in terms of talking about, it would be great to hear from both of you about what new kinds of practices have emerged in the crisis to ensure continuity in learning and how we might sustain these in the future. And so maybe Megan, if you can get us started, and if you could start by, you can introduce yourself and your work and then take on this question, that would be great.
Sure. A pleasure to be with you all today. Well, I'm Megan Falone, and I'm the director and CEO of Barefoot College International. And we take a pretty disruptive view to education in general and have for more than 48 years. So I think that this period has been, for us as an organization, very validating, because we are an organization grounded in self-sufficient, community-based learning solutions, both for children and for adults. And so that message, that sense of resiliency, the adaptability, and the power that communities are actually asserting for themselves in this moment is just really a validation of the investment that we've made in building those decentralized methods of education. And it also dovetails with the blended learning model that we began more than 6 years ago to embed high technology tools into supporting in-person curriculums at community level in ways that build both the power infrastructure and internet infrastructure right in the community in order to serve those, but also then to be able to go ahead and disseminate content created from within communities, blended with content that comes from more traditional pedagogies. And so again, looking at really a very holistic way of thinking about education, something that develops both citizenship, agency in children, that gives them relevancy in rural areas with the knowledge they have. From that place and the embedding of gender in across all of the things that we do in gender sensitive curriculums, we really have seen this power that communities can take up for their own education provision. Now, clearly that's serving us extremely well in this period. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, we gave our 11 states of solar-powered digital night schools the opportunity to either shut down or to continue operating. The extraordinary thing is that they have all continued to operate without question. And I think this is one of the ways that we just really see the power of building that resiliency and in thinking about different ways to bring education to people as opposed to expecting everybody to come to it. Now, to directly speak to Safina's point, which was just so relevant about the disproportionate impact on girls, which is clearly going to happen because that's happening to women too, across the world, economically, socially, and in many other ways. I think that this model that we've developed is even more relevant as it directly takes education to girls in last mile communities, in the way that they can access it, that it doesn't interfere with or conflict with their other responsibilities, and in a safe, quote unquote, safe environment where families feel it's okay for them to attend. So I think we have to sort of stop kind of talking down and start listening up to designing and reacting quickly with education and with knowledge transfer in ways that respond to what people tell us they need, even more than what we may think they need. So I think this is really a moment for deep humility and deep innovation, really taking away the barriers and the ideas, and really thinking about how do we want to develop great citizens in the long run, and what needs to be put into communities to do that. So I'll stop it there and leave it back to you.
That's great. And I just have one quick follow-up. Can you talked about the internet infrastructure that you're able to get into communities. Can you give us maybe one example of how that works? Just so
Sure. So one of our programs actually trains women who can't read and write, who've never had a formal education, to be fully functioning solar engineers. Our in-house rural R&D department has designed a solar-powered projector, which works on a single solar panel, a 30-watt panel, and charges during the day, and then gives 5 to 6 hours of a projector assisted with one Apple iPad mini, one Apple TV embedded inside it, and a Panasonic high lumen projector. So our schools are held outside. So we use the solar mamas to put solar into the community. We use the R&D department to design technology and hardware that works independently, totally self-sufficiency in the community. And then we take content and push that content through a solar-powered Wi-Fi router into the community. And this really works as a completely independent mechanism for a community. So that the big challenge of, oh, well, they don't have reliable internet, well, it works offline. So all they need is one window of internet at some point in the week for that teacher to get the content they need. And the content is specifically designed in response to what the children and what the teacher are saying they need support on. So this is not a sort of situation where we're attempting to force digital content onto communities. We're looking at what do they need support on in order to embed that knowledge, that information in stronger ways for the community. The fascinating thing, of course, is that sitting at the edge of our night schools, because they are held outdoors in communities in most cases, are parents. And so this messaging and this information, we forget, has a much wider impact, because it is also being imbibed by all of the parents in the community, which immediately makes that link between parent, child, content, teacher, environment, community support mechanisms. So this really has a much deeper way of affecting communities, and the impact, therefore, is really profound, especially on parents' ability to be able to reinforce learning and encourage additional learning, and to create that link.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Megan. And Surya, it would be great to hear from you, have a little bit of an introduction from you, maybe any response to the poll, and hear about your views on the practices that may have emerged from the crisis to ensure continuity in learning, and how we might sustain them in the future.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being on this panel. I'm Surya Karki, and I happen to lead the country operations for United World Schools in Nepal. For us, the pandemic has come as a reality check, and also our ability to adapt to the situation. It's already been 3 months since our 226 schools in Myanmar, Cambodia, and Nepal have remained closed, and it has affected the education of over 20,000 children that currently attend our school. And for us, it has our model and continue delivering the education that we deliver, that we do the last mile, which is UWS works in some of the most rural areas of the world, in Myanmar, Cambodia, Nepal. By rural, I mean they're really only accessible by 4x4. Technology, phone receptions, all of these are very, very rare. And with the schools closed for 3 months already in all of these 3 countries that we work in, and as our work concerns, with children in rural areas whose only life outside their homes and farms was the schools we built, our work during the pandemic has evolved around children's welfare during the time, which is why we wanted to maintain close contact with all our communities. So the primary focus has been ensuring that we're continuously in contact with them, we're continuously getting to know what the situation down there is. And so from early on, as soon as the lockdowns in all of the 3 countries got in and the cases started rising, we thought we basically designed a plan where we focused firstly on awareness about COVID-19, primarily because these areas where we work, parents and communities are not really very literate. So in order to tackle the fake information, fake news about COVID, as well as to ensure that protection and prevention is prevalent for children and communities, we took on the task of ensuring that there were awareness campaigns in regards to flyers, as well as radio programs, radio messages being broadcasted so that people knew what COVID was, how to be, how to stay away, how to ensure that there's prevention, how to keep safe, and all sorts. The second initiative that we did simultaneously, along with the first, which was the awareness campaign, was ensuring that all the WASH facilities in our schools, the 226 schools covering 226 communities, were all open. This is primarily because all of these toilets that we've built in these communities might probably be the first and only toilet in the area. And so ensuring that sanitation materials were available, as well as the WASH facilities were open, was crucial. At present, these WASH facilities are being used 51% by female, 49% by males, and this is very crucial. On a daily basis, we have around 40 people on average using these WASH facilities, and with that, our third focus was ensuring that the continuity of student learning was happening, because 3 months we were planning for a short lockdown, but the lockdown continued on. So ensuring that the learning was happening was what we planned for in the third phase of response. And early on, as soon as the schools closed 3 months ago, UWS created a working group to propose solutions to education continuity. So considering all our schools are in remote areas with very little to zero internet access, and our children's family do not have the capacity to afford technology gadgets for online education, we identified 2 solutions. We currently have 2 hours of radio program running daily, and the program content includes normal curriculum classes. The students listen to it and send in questions to a designated focal person who compiles them and ensures that the questions are answered in the first 10 minutes of the program the following day. So it's like a normal classroom, and we've had to adapt being in a physical space to going into a wavelength, to a radio wavelength, so that children are still continuing their classes, learning, being engaged. Another initiative in continuity of education has been takeaway education, where children in 1 kilometer radius of any of our teachers are invited in numbers to take classes for 2 hours daily. So different small number of students come in and take classes. The small number of students are to ensure that the physical distancing is maintained and learning is happening. So they take homework, neighbor takes the work for the student, and then the student continues learning. On the sustainability part, we're working with local and state governments. This has been crucial to our model. At present, radio broadcasting fees in Nepal particularly are part funded by the local governments. The state government is currently in the process of taking on the radio broadcast. I think all of these partners being involved together addresses quite a lot of need, that the education, getting it to the last mile people that do not have access to any sort of technology is crucial. And so in the long term, which is what we're really focused on, is to make sure that we can reopen our schools for our communities, because this is where all the children in the community gather and make plans and ensure that they're continuing in the future. And also to continue to protect the long-term investment made by our donors. And some of them include Educated Child, whom we have worked with from the outset of the UWS Nepal from 2016. So overall, it's been a challenge. We've been challenged to adapt. We've been challenged to rethink, but also we've been challenged to plan for what is yet to come. And working with the government, working with stakeholders, working with communities has been at the heart. And sustainability for us is both delivering on commitments made to our donors, but also to our communities and with the government, but ensuring that we are still delivering on our mission to teach the unreached, which is getting the education to the last mile people that do not really have such infrastructures in place.
Thank you, Surya. That's brilliant. And I would love to, we only have about 7 minutes left in this session. So I'd love to pose another question to you both. Maybe we'll have time for that question, to look at how we can better leverage existing resources within communities and within ecosystems, and how we can also leverage the power of communities. And so Megan and Surya, you both touched on this question around communities in particular. So it'd be great to hear first from Megan maybe on this topic, and then Surya, we'll close out with you.
So I think in listening to what Surya said, which of course I echo so strongly, so much of the work that they do and how they approach the work in a holistic way, I think this is something quite fundamental. I think we can't, at least for rural communities, last mile communities, we can't separate development from education. Those things somehow need to fit together because they support each other so strongly. And I think I feel that way also about parents and other community mechanisms, that we kind of can't look at education in this distilled way that just thinks about what children need to learn and doesn't really take into account all the different places that children learn from. And how those learning environments, just like our first world learning environments, need to be really dynamic. They need to have multiple people within them all exchanging knowledge and all being able to participate in some way, shape, or form in a child's sense of themselves and in their curiosity and in their ability to apply their knowledge in practical ways. So I think that's, for me, why the community piece is just so essential to what we do, and has to drive in many ways in rural education what we do. As we go into a world that we're having one COVID right now, but that could become a recurring, and I think probably will be, a recurring situation of disruption. So what we really need to be building is systems for education that are able to adapt to a variety of different disruptions. In order for that adaptability to be inherent in the programs, that needs to have community as a central part of it, because we need their strength to both support, be resilient, create the infrastructure around it, even if that's very grassroots infrastructure. Communities are incredibly able to innovate solutions to the things that they want to have and that they feel are important. So if we don't put them in a position of power, and I say that in quotes, with respect to the education of their children, we are losing probably the most essential piece of infrastructure that needs to be there to support really a dynamic approach to a systems changing mindset around education.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. Okay, and Surya, what kind of response do you have to Megan, and what thoughts do you have on this question about engaging communities and leveraging the resources within existing ecosystems? Surya, do we still have you? Oh, there you are. You may have gone on mute for a minute.
Sorry. No, I was saying I couldn't agree more with what Megan was saying. And for us as well, communities are at the heart of our work, our model. And we listen to them, we understand them, and we do what is best only if they think that's the best for them. And so along this line, leveraging extra resources and its ecosystem, it's important to understand which ecosystem is in hand, and the resources all of us need as well as have. because the ecosystem that we work in is currently being, it's being challenged. It's being told to innovate. It's been told to do it differently or even change the things that we're doing. And, this is primarily difficult in times like these where everyone is looking for resources to support vulnerable communities that they work with and implementing solutions and much more of these. In our case, to amplify our adaptation to the new normal, we've looked to co-funding partnerships with the government, as well as immense support from our supporters from around the world, which has been crucial to continuing what we do. The crucial thing we did early on in our field is offered our services to the government, because this was, did I? Okay, yeah. Sorry. The crucial thing we did early on in our field is offered our services to the government as well as our communities. And this was important for us, to be with them, to be at the forefront saying we are partners with you. And we also, led the way. We led the way rather than only followed. And so that was crucial in gaining the trust that was needed from all of our beneficiaries. And communities have been at the core of our model for building recovery, importantly in these uncertain times we're living through. Like, we build and run our schools in collaboration and partnership with beneficiary communities. Early on in the crisis, we looked to them for guidance, due to which we're the first people that our 200 communities look to. And that's the best part of it. We went.
Oh, I think we've lost Surya, unfortunately. Oh, Surya, maybe you're back. Let's give you a second. Okay. Unfortunately, I think we've probably lost Surya. It looks like he's dropped off the call. I think we may have an unstable internet connection. That does, however, bring us to the close of the first half of our dialogue. I wish we had a couple of hours with each of these speakers. The content is so rich. But we would like to switch to the second half of our dialogue now. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining us and for all the interesting insights. And so we'd like to move on to dialogue 2. I'll invite Lorenzo and Bo to join the dialogue now. And so let me just do some quick introductions. Dialogue 2 is focusing on innovation in schools. So just in terms of introductions, Lorenzo Benusi is Chief Innovation Officer of the, I will probably mispronounce this, but I'll try my Italian, Fondazione per la Scuola della Campania di San Paolo.
Right.
Yes, one of the biggest foundations of banking origin in Europe, and a really critical foundation in terms of education innovation. And Dr. Bo Stiern Thompson is the Vice President and Chair of Learning Through Play in the LEGO Foundation. And the function of the chair and his role is to be the expert at the highest level to the executive leadership on how children and adults learn through play, and providing consultation to a variety of global actors at the bilateral, regional, and multilateral levels. We would like to get started with another poll here. So if you look at the right hand of your screen, what innovations are most needed in schools? This poll gets us started in this dialogue on innovation in schools. So innovations in use of space, use of pedagogy and teaching approaches, leadership and management, technology, or curriculum. So let's keep the poll open for just a few more seconds. Okay, I will end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ending. Okay, all right. So really interesting poll results. It looks like the majority of our respondents believe that innovations in pedagogy and teaching approaches are most needed, and that curriculum would probably be the next in order, and technology as well as leadership and management are also critical areas. So Lorenzo and Bo, over to you. I'll start out with the first question, and as we did in the prior session, if you can introduce yourself and your work a bit as you get started in answering some of these questions as well, that would be great, and any reflections you have on our poll results as well. The first question is, what new approaches to teaching and learning should we integrate when reinventing the system? And what should our schools look like if we are to begin reinventing the system? So Bo, we're going to start with you. I understand you have some slides to share and some insights from some recent research that the foundation has done.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for hosting these sessions. As mentioned, I was global head of research in the LEGO Foundation for the past decade, and now I'm taking on the responsibility as chair of Learning Through Play, which is the chief advisor working across our LEGO entities and doing more efforts to share our research and our knowledge with our international partners. So the key insight that I'll focus on, given the light of post-COVID and the need for resilience and creativity and adaptability, is basically there's not any opportunity any longer to not focus on combining well-being and the learning agenda. So what we see and what we hear from our reflections on COVID-19 from our partners and countries is that the desperate situations that families and children are in basically require us to combine children's engagement and the social relationships with the discussions around learning and education. And this is where we believe, maybe not new in some sense, but the innovation we have to look to is how children learn through play. And I think if you can see the slide that is up right now, obviously play is important in terms of outdoors and games and physical and creative activities. But what we have focused on over the past decade with our international research partners is it's actually the experience. It's a process of learning. It's about being active, not passive. It's about being collaborative and not learning in isolation. And it's about using meaningful activities, not meaningless. And it's allowed to test and try out things where you have joy in learning new things. So one say, well, it's not a play activity, but it's an experience that's so essential for the science of learning. And the report that is on the right side of this slide is available and co-authored with our research partners. So that sense of joy of learning is essential to combine the well-being and the learning agenda. But take the next one. The new study we are launching right now is that we have to move away from thinking about knowledge and skills in opposition to each other. A new study done in the UK, large-scale survey among parents and teachers, but also in detail ethnographic studies, co-built engagement with children in UK and South Africa demonstrates that the children's use of technology is completely integrated with their everyday lives. Whether you have telephones, low-tech devices, or tablets or computers. And what it does, it's clearly developing both the knowledge and the skills, the emotional well-being and the family relationships through playful experiences. So they actually test and try out things and manipulate information. And the 4 key insights that I think we should pay note to in terms of innovations is that this has implication in terms of how we think about education in post-COVID. I don't think there's any way of getting back to what education looked like. Also because we've failed on our sustainable development goals and we are leaving behind children still in the form of shape education right now. But the implications that comes out of this study illustrates that we need to think more socially about technologies and learning, and that we are enabling and empowering children to test ideas and try out new things and creating content. Secondly, it's about children taking initiative, but it's not about following a fixed path of a game or an app or being instructed to distance learning, but it's about setting own goals and being able to personalize your experience. And thirdly, it's about a varied diet of play with technologies. So different types of play experiences creates that equity where children are able to choose what's meaningful to them and to experiment with that. And fourthly, usually we think about adults, what is the adult role? And it's the combination of instruction and guidance and free play that has been important. So the rethinking the adult role in terms of guidance through technologies, but there's a clear role in terms of adults' role, both in play and learning. And finally, in these times, but even more important for technology, they need to reflect much more diversity. So what we see in technologies, whether it's in South Africa or UK, there's such a standardization in technologies, and it needs to reflect culture, race, ethnicity, and language and gender. So that's kind of the key insights at this point. And the overall message is, if you think about the combination of well-being and resilience in education, we actually have a unique opportunities with play to combine the knowledge and understanding with the range and broader skills that are recognized as needed and able to be at the forefront of helping students understand what does it mean with technology and safe content. Thanks. I think you're on mute.
I kept telling myself to turn the mute off and then I forgot. Apologies for that. So thank you so much, Bo. Lorenzo, it would be great to hear from you in response to this about what new approaches to teaching and learning we should integrate when reinventing the system, and what might our schools look like as a result. If you have any comments, of course, on the polls or on Bo's remarks, that would be really useful as well.
Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me in this super interesting event. I definitely agree with the poll results and also with Bo's presentation. And just spotting the end of the presentation, we adopted the MIT Resnick model on peers, play, etc. So we are definitely in the same line. Just a few words about what I'm doing and the pedagogical approach that we are promoting with school. I'm Lorenzo Benussi, Chief Innovation Officer Fondazione per la Scuola, and I'm leading a Riconnessioni program, which is one of the largest and most comprehensive action of educational innovation in Italy, and we work on two sides. From one side, we developed fiber optic networks for schools in partnership with private corporations. And from the other side, we involve teachers in a pathway of professional development that can make them able to face 21st century schools. What we try to promote in our labs, and we involved more than 5,000 teachers in the last 3 years. And during the COVID crisis that started, the lockdown in Italy started at the beginning of March. And since then, we opened a program of webinars that collected more than 1,500 teachers a day in March and in April. So a lot of people gathering together in order to share experience, but also to talk about their fears about the situation, their problems, and of course their solution. And what we learned is that, and what we try to promote in our labs is something that was already mentioned before, but I just want to underline our approach is teacher and student agency like leadership or professionalism. So the idea that the teacher can be proactive in facing difficulties that probably is going to come in the future. And so we have this idea of teacher as designers of educational experience. Designers in order to mix also space and time in the educational experience for kids. On the other side, students should develop independency. That was key during the crisis, and we noticed that students with high independency could cope with the mixed didactics and learning platform they used during the crisis. So we needed to develop soft skill, the so-called soft skill, as well as core competencies, but that are fundamental for students to adapt to the changing environment and to grow as a person and citizen. The other point is professionalization of teacher. In Italy, the system is really structured. There are very strong trade union. We needed to work with them in order to change the public contract of teaching and find a new way of creating this and working on this professionalization, starting with core competencies, but also developing new techniques that are not so well taught in Italian university and in general. Then another key point is the hybridization of time and space, because timetable disappeared, classroom disappeared, so we needed to have to work inside classroom, but also outside, and probably in the future, classroom will be also museum, garden, zoo, and in fact, we are working in this summer with schools in order to compose a mixed program, so kids can go at school 2 hours and then move to another institution, and it's completely new approach, and it's difficult, of course, to make all this organization working together, and that brings a multidisciplinary approach. So we needed also to mix the subjects. Then, of course, personalization. We had the impression, I mean, we listened to many teachers telling very good stories about, for example, special needs in crisis. The possibility of having personalized path for example, kids affected by dyslexia has been very helpful during the crisis. And so we need to bet on that. And then we already mentioned this point, but it's a key is a new alliance, a new cooperation with the third sector, with family, with cultural organization, in order to expand the classroom that it's going to be probably closed, or by the way, it's going to be the rare resource. So we used to think about classroom as something that is always there, but in the future it's not going to be like that. It's going to be rare being all together in the classroom. So we need to work with the third sector, work with the museum, libraries, etc., in order to compose a new classroom that it's mixed, that it's hybrid. And just the last note about the third sector, we're working a lot with deprived area, with difficult kids that didn't follow the digital the digital school in this month. It's almost 25% of kids had problem on being connected. But what we found is that is not only a technical problem. It's not only about having a computer or connectivity. It's always something around the kids, in the family, in the environment. So we need to work with the third sector that can follow these kids also beside the classroom and the school hours, but in their own life. And we are working on that with many associations in order to follow these difficult cases.
Thank you very much for that. Lots of really interesting threads there that I'd like to pick up. It would be great to address our second question. If we have time after you've answered that, we can maybe go on to some Q&A from the audience. How do we remove the physical and cultural barriers that prevent schools from innovating? And what innovations may be emerging now that are relevant for the current crisis and could be adapted for the future? So Bo, if you might address that to start, that would be great.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's a fantastic moment right now to remove barriers. And if you look at some of the big institutions and changes that have happened in education over the years, over the centuries, it actually happened on the back of situations we're in right now. So if you want behavior change and the attitude change, we need to use that opportunity right now. I think a few examples, the ability that we see the use of the home environment and the community environment as a much more integrated part of learning is definitely a new innovation. So you can say you are at a distance to the school in many respects right now, but you're actually in proximity to community and sometimes your home environment and meaningful experiences. So I think we see a change in learning spaces and a change in the rhythm of which you use these spaces to be much more informal and self-directed. And there are new technologies and new examples of that. So there are more personalized platforms where you basically gauge the interest of children based on where they are. And you have portfolios that follows you based on what you're doing. A second thing which we touched upon, but just briefly mentioning, I think the the mindset change that skills is at the foremost important, or competencies for education, like social, emotional, and well-being and creativity, like that cannot be questioned any longer. It is one of the key purposes that our ability to be creative and adapt and resilience is what needs to drive education, and not in terms of knowledge in itself, but it's integrated. And there are fantastic opportunities to look at. There's a Fresh Grade platform that looks at ways where teachers and parents and students can co-engage. We see social emotional platforms where children can actually test and try out social emotional skills. There are Thrively, it's an online platform where you basically talk about interest. And lastly, I think what this calls out, and what we've seen in some of the schools that really made their way through this, is the schools that give children agency and opportunities to personalized learning. Because when you are at a distance to things, you need to take much more ownership. And there are many ways where we can think about technologies that support formative types of assessments and support. But basically, personalization, where children build on their real life interest when they learn, so they become more self-directed and the teachers are guiding. So the change in learning spaces, really focus on skills, and then these new forms of personalization. I think if you build on that, we are breaking some of the barriers, and probably even freeing up some of teachers' opportunities to be guidance instead of instruction in classroom.
That's great. So I like that the changing learning spaces, new focus on skills, and a focus on the agency of children is three great takeaways from this. And Lorenzo, what are your thoughts on this topic around how we might remove some of these barriers to innovation, and what innovations might be emerging now that we can learn from, both for the current crisis and for the future?
Yes, in our experience, to remove barriers for innovation, we need to work on three ingredients of innovation that are technical, organizational, and pedagogical. I already said something about pedagogical innovation, that it's mostly about agency hybridization. On the organizational side, that it's not so important following the pool results by audience, but I think it's still important. What we try to do is promoting leadership and change management. There is a team on that. There is a problem on that. We have an issue on that. We have to have ed teachers that are more managers than they used to be in the past. But by the way, still having a cultural expertise. So not just a simple manager for every industry, but somewhere that has a specific skill in education. And we have, I think, to teach the infosphere. That is this idea brought out by the Floridi, the philosopher. The idea is that we are working, since the boundary between life online and offline break down, and we become seamlessly connected to each other and supported by smart responsive object, we are all becoming integrated into an infosphere. And that's something we need to understand, and we need to teach to the young generation. So being a human in the infosphere, more than technology by itself. That's something I think new and difficult. And just the bottom line is that all of this is very interesting, but it's impossible to realize unless we have good policy. We are working a lot with the Italian ministry, and we've been working with the ministry that comes before her on digital infrastructure and digital competencies. I mean also infrastructure in general, so not just digital, but I want to focus on that. Without good connection, all of this is impossible. So the bottom line is that we need to have national and international program to promote broadband connectivity, fiber optic connectivity to all students, all schools. And that would be a great advancement in all countries. And just the last thought is that we need to change the machine, not just make it better. or bigger. We need really to change it because the system before was broken. We already know that, and that's the great opportunity to do it. But some government has just make it bigger, more building, more teacher. No, it's not enough. We need a different car. We need something very different. That's one point. And that's the other point is that as my experience in Italy, now we are almost out of the problem of the crisis, and the general feeling is to forget and to hurry up in our previous life. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, is the major challenge. So we have to cope with anxiety and the psychological stress we had for the COVID, but not just removing the fact, but working on that in order to change the system. And that's something that I'm really worried in this period of time, because everybody is just want his or her life back, but it's not good for innovation.
That is such an interesting take. I hadn't heard about this in an educational context before, and I like the idea that the tendency for us to all want to move on and put all this behind us is so strong that we have to make sure that doesn't close the window on some of these innovations that feel like they're kind of newly possible right now. So this is great. We've got a few minutes for questions from the audience. We have a few that are coming through. The first one I'd like to direct to Bo. So quite a specific question around what some of the best examples are that you've seen of incorporating play and socio-emotional learning for children who are now home and don't have digital access. So is like any home-based learning models, edutainment, magazines, etc. And the question is a reference to the Citizens Foundation, which is developing some of these resources.
Yeah, sure. We actually have a few examples also, which we consolidated, which is on a blog post on our website. But I can think about three very practical ones. What seems to be important in distance learning, particularly young children, was the engagement of a small group online activities with their friends. So it's very difficult in an online environment to teach distance learning to a group of 20 or even more children. So what was set up was half an hour check-ins with different groups of friends. And they create that little trust and easy to speak and so forth. Secondly, we used a lot in our examples from the schools we engaged with. The children literally built or did small projects to illustrate how they're feeling and what they're doing right now. So that's basic, back to creative activities and play. But as soon as you represent how you're feeling and what you're doing in physical models or drawings and so forth, it's easier for you to present that. A third one was a really nice one I like, which is actually interviewing parents about how they felt about the situation. So the children are asked to, find people in your community, in your environment, or your parents to talk about what you're doing right now and how you're feeling, to gauge that conversation with the relationship you're in right now. So these are just three examples, but generally this starting point is you have to kind of express and share how you're feeling and find different mediums for doing that, and then being able to connect with the friends to be able to share that.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I was hoping, Lorenzo, I don't know whether you can speak to a question that's just come up about what the digital skills are that may be required now and into the future. If that's a question that you are interested in answering, that was one that I thought was interesting that came up here.
Yeah, I think that in our experience and what we see with our teachers is that the best way to learn digital technology, digital competency and skills is by doing something else. So if we are doing, for example, storytelling, we use coding. If we are doing maths, we use a video tutorial. So trying to not starting with technology, that's the problem, because it's unfair for teachers. They are not technicians, they are teachers. They don't want to understand how the privacy setting of Google works. They need to know that exists privacy setting, and we are teaching about privacy settings. But if you start with that, it's a mistake. You're gonna lose their attention, and it's absolutely understandable. But if you, on the other way, if you build a teamwork that involve also sharing things and having and make something public, then you can start speaking about privacy setting but in a much more interesting way.
So integrating much more with core pedagogy, yeah.
Yeah, I think that technology is the default condition, and of course we need to develop these competencies. But it's not just the first theme. It's the mean we use to reach our goal. That is something different.
Bo, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah. I think generally technology is, as Lorenzo was mentioning, is built on top of existing practices. So it's not, in that case, it reinforces, and hopefully it's also built on the quality of what learning really is. But one of the key things is to question technology, to critically reflect on the role of these technologies, what content they bring, what information there is. And the second part of that is to create content, as was demonstrated from this research study. So the opportunity to test and try out ideas with technologies and create stories and create projects and articulate problems to be able to share new collaboration. So all the qualities that exist and the evidence on project-based learning, problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning that we have summarized in our past research is just need to be used with technologies, and it basically just reinvigorate the use of these technologies. I think it's needless to say, there are some basic skills around technologies which are difficult to nurture unless you have access to devices, and that's what we see also across these communities. You need access to better quality of technologies, whether it's tablets or phones. But generally, it is you need to reflect and discuss these ideally with adults.
Fantastic. Okay, well, this brings us to the end of the second half of our dialogue. Bo and Lorenzo, thank you very much for your comments. And back to WISE, our hosts. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi. Thank you, Mary, Megan, Surya, Bo, and Lorenzo. Profound dialogues with a lot of learnings on so many different topics around children's agency, skills, use of space, role of play, and working with partners. We've really enjoyed that. We reach kind of the last segment of our session for today. I want to say, what a great and inspiring morning. It has been really informative and inspiring listening to our speakers today. So thank you for being with us, our speakers and moderators, and sharing your wise words. Thank you for our partners, our WISE community. Also, thank you for our partners for this specific event, Holland IQ and Salzburg Seminar. Of course, a big thank you goes to all our audience who have joined us from all around the world. This platform continues to exist with your support. I would like to share some key highlights from the day and share after that some important announcements about what's happening next. Safina Hussein from Educate Girls started with an alarming statement. She said, with patriarchy back to play, schools will become a dream for a lot of girls. So she reminded us that we need to move from a P2 model, and P here stands for poverty and patriarchy, to a 3R model, and R here stands for relief, recovery, and reimagining education through a gender lens. Jaya from UWC Japan stressed that giving the learners agency in their learning is very crucial to transforming towards better outcomes. This will allow for people to become lifelong and life-wide learners. I like that term, life-wide learners. Haven't used it before. So learners' agency and access to learning opportunities are key for the reforming of our systems. Rosie Clayton shared and called for reimagining and rethinking the role of the digital technology as we pave the way forward. Surya from United World Schools Nepal highlighted the importance of working with governments and communities to introduce change and positive change. Mike Feary stressed that we need to educate everyone, and we need to do that now. He compared the change that is coming in education to a phenomenal tsunami, but I would add, I hope that we have positive outcomes from this change and nothing like the outcomes of a tsunami. Fatma Ramehi, the CEO of Doha Film Institute, highlighted that our humanity is kicking back in. As communities, we have experienced solidarity and unity during these dark times of crisis. We are all stronger when we collaborate, exchange knowledge, and discuss ideas. All of those statements highlight the important roles that we play at the levels of the individual, institutions, communities, and societies at large, and the ecosystems that bring us all together, while of course leveraging on technology. And as our speaker Lorenzo mentioned, let us not forget. So I hope we don't forget and we learn from all of those experiences. I would like to remind you all that we are crowdsourcing your perspectives, our audience, through the different polls we have been posting yesterday, today, and tomorrow to help shape a forthcoming white paper to be launched as part of Save Our Future campaign by the Education Division. So continue to vote with us. I would also like to remind you that the afternoon session starts at 6 p.m. Doha time. That's in less than 6 hours. Our main topics will include re-empowering the stakeholders in education, in the education process. How do we place students and teachers at the center of institutional decision-making? Leapfrogging inequality through radical transformation. How can we begin to redesign our current models of teacher development for workforce upskilling and learning design to truly realize equitable education systems? Some of our amazing speakers include Daniel Quintero, Mayor of Medellin from Colombia, Larry Rosenstock, founder of High Tech High, our Wise Prize Laureate for 2019, Anna Rad, founder and director of EcoSteam, Rebecca Winthrop, Senior Fellow of Brookings Institution. I would also like to remind you that tomorrow will be the last day in this event series. We will examine how the current crisis has accelerated cross-sectoral collaborations and in turn underline the need to bridge the deep digital divides. Some speaker names that I would like to highlight are Yang Lan, chairperson of Sun Media Group and Sun Future Art Education Foundation from China, Patrick Brothers, and Maria Spice, co-founders of Holland IQ, are partners for the event. Vicky Colbert, founder of Escuela Nueva and our laureate. Sherry Weston, president of Social Impact and Philanthropy from Sesame Workshop. Rukmini Banerjee, from the CEO of Pratham. Christos Stylianides, the European Commissioner. Tune in the conversations later today and tomorrow at Education Disrupted, Education Reimagined. Till then, take care everyone, continue to reimagine, and see you shortly.